We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AVRant. I'm Tom Andrew, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AVRant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. I have a little frog in my throat this week, so there might be some clearing of throats and whatnot.
It's probably norovirus.
It's definitely not anything too serious, but
what do they call it? Is it Norvus? Is that S in there? I feel like there's an S in there.
I don't know what you're referring to.
The bird stuff.
There's avian flu.
I know, but that has another.
There's norovirus.
That's the one. That's what I said. So I said it right.
It was, yeah.
Okay. Well,
I don't know. Then you went all weird about it, and I didn't know what you meant anymore.
Well, who knows what I mean, Rob? You're supposed to know. You're the
all
Canadian
right.
in the room. You're supposed to understand.
How is that helping these days?
I don't know who's annexing who. You guys might annex the West Coast, or we're
inviting,
North?
You know. If the West Coast of the U.S. wants to secede and join us, the door's open.
California picked a rotten time to make that.
Well,
I don't know. I think you guys can lowball them right now, poor guys over
Holy
there.
Cow,
it is painful to see people saying the same things to people whose houses burnt down. As they said to people in Florida when their houses flooded.
Well,
especially after Milton, when houses that had never ever needed flood insurance, nowhere near the coast, no one ever thought they would flooded because of poor drainage or a blockage or something like that, or rivers overflowing. To see people saying, well, you should have known, you should have just, if you want to live there, you should have enough insurance, or you should have enough money to rebuild your house. Shut up. I
mean, the insurance companies have known that this was coming for the past 10 years and have been adjusting their rates or refusing to insure places that, that's not necessarily an actual choice.
Yes.
But I mean, the images coming out of Los Angeles, the areas that have been struck, it is horrific. Our hearts are going out to everybody there. But I mean, it is wild when you see the people who have done some of the coverage of, because I mean, of course, if you just take the photos that are facing where the fires are or have been, that's one view, and you get the sense that it's like all of Los Angeles was ablaze, which wasn't really. I mean, Los Angeles is huge, so
it is it is not small.
Of course, you would know that it's not literally the entire city like that, but when you see the wide angle shot, like people have gone up into the mountains and taken shots going down, and that, like, it really does look like a fire-breathing dragon went through there, because it's like a straight line. Because I mean, that's where the wind was blowing at these crazy, crazy speeds and carrying these embers and these flames and fanning the flames as it went. But I mean, if you just look at the aftermath of it and ongoing, it's not as though it's done now.
There's still fires as of today.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy how much it looks like a fire-breathing dragon just swooped down and shot a line of fire out of its mouth going down there. So, crazy stuff.
I saw a video from a news report where they were covering a fire tornado. Mm-hmm. And then the reporter was like, oh look, it looks like we have a fire tornado over here. If you can see how the flames are shooting. I'm like, why are you so calm? What? Why are you so calm? This sounds like the Sharknado people ran out of ideas and went, what if we put a fire in there?
Yep.
And no one's freaking out? I mean, I know there's a lot of stuff to freak out in the world right now, but my Lord. I was like, I feel like you needed to raise your voice a little bit. I'm not saying that you need to panic, but I felt like there needed to be more emphasis on the GD fire tornado over there. Are you guys seeing this?
It has been seen before. The term is not completely brand new in this time, but it is terrifying stuff. And then the ridiculous stories of people who are like, well, I'm going to get some internet clicks out of this, so I'm going to fly my drone into the firefighting area and knock down one of the planes that was actually sent from Montreal, Canada, that went down there, and that's the one that collided with a I mean, people think of like a little camera drone. No, it was a pretty sizable drone that somebody was flying there, and it damaged one of the wings. And so just insane stuff that's going on in the world.
And then you also hear stories, and I've seen, like, there's a news reporter who was basically taking that they were, I don't know if they're still doing it, taking requests, and people were just sending them their address, and they were just posting up on TikTok and probably other places, but I saw it on TikTok. Their homes are like, can you check and see if my home, how my home is?
Yeah.
And it was just, here's your house or what's left of it, and I'm so sorry, or congratulations or whatever, but mostly it was I'm so sorry, because that's mostly what happened.
I mean, what was going on there was if your house caught fire in any way, then that was it. That was the end of it, because I mean the ridiculous winds that were coming along with it.
And at least I could go back into my home and like recover some stuff. You know what I mean?
I suppose, yeah.
That was very hard to do.
No
it's
kidding.
very hard to go back and like physically throw out a bunch of stuff that has been ruined by storm waters and flood waters and sewage. It's very hard to do that, but to go back and just walk through the ashes of your life is like, I can empathize, but I can't really imagine what that feels like. And that's it's heartbreaking. So I definitely, I deal with everything with humor. So if you feel like I'm making light of this, I am not. I mean,
it's always the laugh to keep from crying if a chuckle comes out, because I mean there are the situations where it's like, well, what can you do? I mean, there's
what can you do?
when it's done, what can you do? And you just kind of guffaw at it because otherwise you're just going to burst into tears, right? One or the other. So
if you're in California and affected by this and all that, hearts go out, and not that there's anything we can do, but if there were, we would. So there you go. If nothing else, we're thinking of you. So that's something.
Yeah.
Fortunately, because of all the questions we have this week, neither of us watched crap.
Didn't watch a thing this week. Yeah, that's.
I think I started that new show on Netflix, the Ted Danzig one, The Last Man.
Oh, right.
Or something.
Yeah,
that's by the same guy who did The Good Place.
That's right.
I'm sure it's going to be amazing. And I liked the first episode, but we're slow going here. We actually pressed play on Arrested Development the first time in like 2 years. And we're like, oh no, what's happening in this show right now? I thought that guy was in hiding. So we have to figure out where we left off. But so we haven't really watched much. I know Rob hasn't either. So
not this past week,
we're just gonna get right into the podcast.
Wasn't the plan. We are indeed. Yeah, we have plenty of content to cover the time this week. So
Rob's not feeling well because he's got the plague.
Yeah.
So this probably is. God, I hope this does not turn out badly for me. But this is probably Rob's last episode because of all the plague he's having, and the next. When we'll try to get an interview from him from the hospital next year.
We can joke a little bit because
he's got the
definitely
socialized medicine, so he'll
like
be in the waiting room for according to the internet. Some of the people on the internet, he'll be in the waiting room for 3 months while waiting for a bed, because that's how they think socialized medicine works.
Well, I mean, it was an entire week in the ER for my aunt before a bed became available. So it's not 3 months, but it is much longer than you would want it to be, because sitting on a stretcher behind a curtain in the ER is not ideal medical practice, and it's not as though any of our hospitals want it to be that way. But so. There we go. Just starting off this podcast episode
on a light note.
Wonderful, optimistic tones all the way around.
No, I shouldn't have said that. All right, this is AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. To get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Come to our website, find our shows, our show notes, as well as our links to all the products that we will be, or articles that we will be mentioning, and the Flickr album, where you can follow along with the pictures that we will be talking about. Contact Rob. Facebook.com/AVRant podcast for now. No, okay. I might delete that too.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I've abandoned Threads. That's for sure.
I'm not. I just watched a very long video about how the Facebook Messenger app is the worst data tracker that you can use, and I use it all the damn time. So I'm very distraught right now because I have to figure out if I'm going to delete it or not.
I mean, the good thing is you can announce on any of the Facebook or related services that you're leaving, and then not, and that'll be perfectly in keeping with their current atmosphere over there. Because
what do you mean? We don't verify
Yeah,
anything.
lies are the order of the day over there. That's just a fantastic way to be.
I am enjoying that with the things that people are saying. I did watch a video where this guy was talking about LinkedIn, and because LinkedIn doesn't verify anything that you say, he put himself down as the CEO of LinkedIn for like a year, and they didn't know this.
Why not?
Somebody finally contacted him and said, "Can you take that down?" And he's like, "You shouldn't be talking to me like this since I'm your boss."
What are you going to do about it?
So they
just the attitude
blocked his profile.
Oh,
It's funny. Anyways, Facebook.com/AVRant podcast, YouTube.com/AVRant might not be there for long either. Who knows? I'm pretty upset with all of social media, the major social media brands right now.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can imagine why. But contact Rob directly, rob@avrant.com. His socials, if he uses any.
I mean,
anymore.
Blue Sky is going to be it for now until they do something horrible, which won't take long, I'm sure.
It won't take long.
It will not take long.
I mean, Neil Gaiman, can we just not have any nice things anymore?
We can't.
It's just,
I know. How hard is it, right? How hard is it?
As a middle-aged white male, it is getting awfully hard to defend myself against all the allegations when all I have is all these people going, but look at this guy. God darn it. Didn't even... It's horrible. I forced myself to read that Vulture article, and I regret it.
Yup.
I regret it. And Sandman season 2 is coming out, and now I'm not going to watch it. Well, just guys,
welcome to 2025.
How hard is that?
What a start.
And I'm not saying. And if you're like, well, I'm not awful. Neither am I. And yet, here we are.
Just claim you're not.
Yeah, that always works. The easiest way to recognize these guys who are awful is when they start claiming they're feminist. You're like, excuse me, what did you say? I'm sorry, was that like the biggest red flag? I'm a feminist icon. Let me go speak at women's conferences. Okay, Joss, let's do that.
Yeah, there's another, yeah.
My Lord. All right.
My head would hang lower if only my microphone weren't in the way. Yeah, that's.
Oh, I already said YouTube. YouTube. Yeah, I already said YouTube. So you contact me at tom@avrant.com, which I barely check. So
true.
Why? I'm hiding my head until 2025 is over because it's not going well.
I mean, things really started going downhill. Around 2016 or so? And
somebody said that the fires in Los Angeles were started by fireworks on New Year's Eve.
Oh,
that's what they think. That's one of the. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I. That's
I mean, I'll bet there was a fire somewhere in Los Angeles started by fireworks.
But that would track, though, don't you think? It's like 2024 is just like, take this one. You thought things were going to get better?
What a year.
I want to thank our listeners of the week. None of whom are listening at this point. They're like, oh, they're getting serious. We better fast forward.
That's what the timestamps are for.
Timestamps are for a reason.
Liberal use of the timestamps this week.
Maybe we're going to have a under 2 hour club for this one.
I'm sure it's larger.
I'm so sorry. Come to listen to the week, support the podcast in some way. One of the ways you can do that is going to avrant.com, click on the buy us a cup of coffee link, and you can send us a PayPal donation. I'm sure he goes by Eli, but Eliezer?
Oh, okay.
I can't imagine he goes by Eliezer, but maybe he does.
Why not?
But or Zur, that would be awesome. I would go by Zur. I would. Mr. Zur, that sounds like just a great name to go by. If you're not going by that, I think you still can, by the way.
Put that in your back pocket for your writing there. You got a new character name.
Mr. Zur. He is either inventing something or taking over the world. Those are the only two options for Mr. Zur. In case you're wondering. Dr. Zur, if he's a doctor. Oh,
yeah, of course. Professor. But thank you, Eliezer, very much for your PayPal donation. It is very much appreciated.
You can also go to patreon.com/AVRant podcast, where you can sign up to be a monthly contributor to the podcast. Every month they'll take a little bit of money from you, or however much you want, a minimum of $1, and give most of it to us. So we currently have 132 patrons over patreon.com. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much. That is patreon.com/AVRant podcast if you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So big thanks to our 132 patrons over there.
All right. If you can't support us financially, we understand. But if you do something, we will mention you here. If you did something and there's no way for us to know about it, just tell us. And it's not a humble brag. It's not even a brag. It's just we want to recognize you.
That's right.
So James over at Linus Tech Tips reached out to Rob for a quick bit of advice about a TV and a soundbar setup. And he sent a few Linus Tech Tips or LTT store items for Rob as a thank you.
Yeah, that was really, really nice. Completely unexpected and in no way necessary. But actually, a really, really nice precision bit screwdriver set, which is something I was actually just about to buy. So it was there was in no way planned or coordinated or anything. Just worked out fantastically well. Really, really nice set that they're selling there. 61 different bits, so way more than I needed.
Like a lot.
It is a lot, but it comes in a really nice full of magnets case where you can actually take the lid off very easily, and then it's all magnetized, so any spare screws you can store in there and they won't jostle around or anything like that. So nice. Yeah, really, really nice. And then some cable management stuff as well, which is way higher end than it needs to be. Right. But some really nice stuff. So thank you, James. It was super thoughtful and unexpected and really, really nice. There
you go. And Dan figured he also should make something for Rob out of the reclaimed apple tree wood that he used to make the cheese board that he sent to me. Did I mention on the podcast how much my wife loved that thing?
I don't know if it was said on the podcast.
So she brought home, funny enough, cheese boards, which were very strange. But somebody at the office gave them to her, and she's like, "What are we going to do with these things? Because they're weird." And they are weird. And I don't want to describe them because you're going to think that Neil Gaiman used them in some way, because that's how weird they were. They were very strange. They had leather straps. It was very strange for a cheese board. It was very strange. So I said, "We're going to give them to our friend, and then they can pass it on as a gag gift to everybody because it's the craziest cheese board I've ever seen." Okay. So we did that, and then me knowing that I had a cheese board hidden in the back, and then I forgot about it. Okay. So then during Christmas, we started, after we opened up the present, so I was like, I forgot. I've got one last present for you. I brought it out, and she loved it. I mean, she was like, "Oh my God, this is the coolest thing." She's like, "It's got your logo on it and everything." I'm like, "Yeah, and it has a little feet. And look how it doesn't have a leather strap, because that's not weird. It's not weird. It's just a normal cheese
feature.
Board.
The omission is a feature."
Yeah, so it was very cool. So he wanted to make something for you. He made a couple of drink coasters that arrived via UPS. Dan's girlfriend saw them and asked why Dan didn't make any for them. I'm actually asking, why don't you make any for me? Because those are very cool looking too. Look at
there we go.
the Flickr album to see these. They're very cool.
Yeah, I'll have them in but if you're seeing on YouTube, there's a YouTube version. I'm showing them live. So yes, two wonderful, beautiful, real wood drink coasters there. They're fantastic. They got our AVRant logo laser etched into those as well. So I love them. They're fantastic.
Somebody got a laser etcher and just can't wait to use it, is what I see, what I'm seeing.
Yeah, I'm not, actually, I kind of I don't really want to use them. They're too nice to put anything on. What if these get a little ring stain on them from a drink that's sitting on them?
I feel like you could lacquer them.
Yes.
You could put some sort of lacquer if there's not already on there. I don't know what he's done.
Or a little laminate cover or something like that would work. Yeah. But I love them. Thank you, Dan.
Just put a mouse pad on it, Rob.
That's right.
Mouse pad fixes everything.
It really does.
It's the AVRant version of Windex. All right, we got some notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going through the beginning of the year and the end of the world, it feels like.
Yeah, can't even gesture broadly all around anymore. It's just taken for granted.
We're just keeping it going. We showed up, and apparently that's enough. So we got some from Sasi, Gurinder, Nathan, Stefan, Bret, who is a member of the original 2 Plus Clubs.
Yeah, the original,
Dazz, the new puppy, might be named Cyrus Lee, but they always say it all together seriously, because that's exactly what Dazz exclaimed when his wife brought him home. Yeah. So Yeah, I don't know what that has to do with anything, but okay, Dazz. Ilango, who appreciated Infinite Gary's interest in making Ilango's new basement home theater room as similar to Gary's as possible, firmly tongue-in-cheek. In all serious, it was quite the pain to build it with good soundproofing, and Ilango never wants to go through that again, but now that's done, he's looking forward to enjoying it and upgrading the equipment over many years to come. So
Yeah.
yeah, we got notes of gratitude again from Sasi, Gurinder, Nathan, Stefan, Bret, Dazz, and Ilango. Thank you for thanking us.
And I'll say the names one more time so they came from my lips. That was Sasi, Gurinder, Nathan, Stefan, Bret, Dazz, and seriously, I suppose. Welcome to the little puppy, and Ilango as well. So thank you all so much for the notes of gratitude and encouragement. They are needed right now. That encouragement for sure. So a big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
So in the news, last year you might recall that ESPN, Fox Sports, and Warner Brothers Discovery announced they'd be launching a new joint sports-only streaming service called Venu, VENU. I do not recall that, and it was like 7 near end of the world disasters ago. So
yeah.
I don't think that I don't think I should be held accountable for not remembering
that's why I said
piece of news that is as unimportant as this.
That's why I said you might recall, and in your case you didn't, and that's fine. That's
I think 7 might be too low. By the way,
nature of the word might.
It was originally supposed to launch in fall 2024. That's going well, by the way. But DirecTV, EchoStar, and particularly Fubo TV railed against it and brought an antitrust lawsuit that successfully postponed the launch of Venu. The plaintiffs argued that for years they have attempted to offer their subscribers a sports-only streaming package, but the sports networks have always blocked any such licensing deal, insisting that their sports channels always be bundled with other channels, so launching Venu together would be totally unfair. Oh, we wanted to make all the money, and now you're trying to make all the money. Let's all argue about making all the money while the world burns.
They have a point, though. They have a point that if this group of companies that own the actual sports broadcasting channels were going to offer a sports-only streaming service, that if you're not going to fall afoul of anti-competitive laws, that you really should, at the very least, make that same package available to other broadcasters like YouTube TV and Fubo TV and Hulu Plus Live TV and all these other ones. Like, they should have access to that same sports bundle, and Venu was not planning to do that. It was going to be exclusive to Venu only, and I think they had a case, and the judges agreed because they did postpone the launch and said, nope, your injunction in place because something ain't right about what you're doing here.
So last week there were some big changes. Disney went ahead and formed a definitive agreement with Fubo to purchase 70% of its shares and merge Fubo to...
You don't like it? Well, we could just buy
How
you.
about we
Would
buy
that fix
you
things?
and we turn your website into one of those just link farms for... with no English characters on it at all. How about that? How about that,
solution?
What a solution!
Fubo, by the way, because it's not the clothing brand.
Whatever. Fubo. Okay. And merge Fubo TV with Disney's own Hulu Plus Live TV service and return Fubo through the antitrust lawsuit. I can't imagine why.
No kidding.
Seemingly clearing the way for Venu, but DirecTV and EchoStar did not withdraw. So now...
This is a quote.
They are going to buy everybody. They're going to own it all.
That hasn't happened so far, but...
All those New Jersey drones are heading towards wherever it is that ESPN and Fox and Warner Brothers Discovery are. This is a quote. Quote, after careful consideration, we, ESPN, Fox Sports, and Warner Brothers Discovery, have collectively agreed to discontinue the Venu Sports joint venture and not launch a streaming service. In an ever-changing marketplace, we determined that it was best to meet the evolving demands of sport fans by focusing on existing products and distribution channels, end quote. That translation is, they were going to buy us and turn us into a link farm.
Well, no, it's the other way around because now Disney owns Fubo, the primary litigant in that case, and they're like, do we need Fox Sports and Warner Brothers anymore to do what we wanted to do? That's what this sounds like to me. Yeah.
So that's the end of Venu, and won't we be shocked when new Fubo and Hulu plus Live TV merged service starts offering a sports-only package in the future? We will be shocked.
Yes, I am.
It will cost $799 a month.
Clutching my pearls preemptively.
I'm so glad I don't like normal sports. I know people who are like, their whole personality is wrapped up in their favorite sports team. And I'm not saying anything bad against you. That's fine if that's your personality and that's how you identify, and that's something that you love. There's people out there who love Star Wars, but I live in Florida where there are adults who go to Disney multiple times a year, do not have kids and never plan on having them. And that's their thing. I mean, I understand that people have their identities wrapped up in their hobbies. I've got no problems with that. But gee, do they make you pay for it? They make you. I mean, the NFL lot, whatever that package was that you would buy, so you could see every game, even if it's blocked out or whatever, was ludicrously expensive. Yep. And the people who love cricket, they have to pay all this money to get the special service. And, if you like more than one sport, God help you, then you're really in trouble. It's not nice. Anyways, so back in 2023, Samsung and Google first announced that they would release their own open source immersive audio format that they were calling IAMF. Isn't AMF like a bowling league or bowling thing? Know. I think it is. I think those are bowling alleys. Yeah. I could be wrong. Could be. Anyways, IAMF stands for Immersive Audio Model and Formats. That wasn't the catchiest name. So at CES 2025, Google and Samsung officially announced Eclipsa audio. Because it's going to eclipse all the other audio. And it'll be
It's not just immersive, it's eclipsive.
It's so bright, you can't see it. You can't look directly at it or you'll go blind.
That's right.
When it passes over, whatever. It will be included in most 2025 Samsung TVs and soundbars. Eclipse, it's going to be super impressive then. We're all going to be excited to hear it the first time it comes out of a soundbar. Eclipsa is an open source, and Samsung is saying royalty-free alternative to Dolby Atmos and DTS-X, but it's squarely aimed at TV speakers, soundbars, and headphones. Content does need to be specifically encoded in Eclipsa audio format, and an Eclipsa audio decoder is necessary to play it back. There's a binaural rendering engine available for headphone playback, and so far Samsung is the only brand supporting it, although they hope future Telecommunications Technology Association certification will bring more brands on board. And while it isn't even official, it's expected that YouTube will be the first, and for a while probably the only, source of Eclipsa audio content. Google says they will launch AI tools. God.
Yep.
Help us.
It was CES.
That will make it easy to convert standard audio into Eclipsa audio. Yep. I swear to you, if this AI thing doesn't go away, I am going to lose my damn mind. It is like, it's so invasive and stupid. I'm so mad that AI is like trying to help me do things that I literally do. I just need you to put the words I say into the little text box and not really decide. Not AI.
That's just voice.
I just want you to do the thing that you used to do just fine. I learned how to speak in such a way that you would hear my words and put them in there, and now you're adding punctuation and changing everything, and I hate it. And I hate you.
Yeah,
I hate it.
The drinking game at CES was to take a shot every time there was a sentence that did not include AI, and everyone was stone cold sober.
Sober. Alcoholics were going through withdrawals.
That's right.
God help us. Onkyo made some noise in the press prior to CES, hyping up a big announcement about the future of the brand and the investments they have made into a new series of products. And when the smoke had cleared and everything had been revealed, their big announcements were...
drum roll, please.
A couple of self-powered desktop speaker models and some mildly overpriced 2-channel gear. Yeah. Behold, the revolution/evolution of audio.
That's right. This is the new Onkyo desktop speakers and 2-channel gear.
Just tell me you don't know what people want without. I mean, just say it. Just like have a focus group. A
little underwhelmed, I must say. The hype did not quite live up to the hype in my
So let's start with the new Onkyo Creator Series. There's a GX10 with a 3-inch woofer and a 3/4-inch tweeter powered by 17 whopping watts of Class D amplification for each speaker. Speaker or driver?
For each speaker. Yeah, so 34 watts total between the pair.
USB-C, Bluetooth, optical, and RCA inputs, with the RCA jacks offering a phono setting. There's also a subwoofer output jack, and they come with an IR remote and stands that tilt them 10 degrees, all for $200 a pair.
I mean, at least the price is not objectionable.
The price is fine.
That's a completely obtainable price there. Yeah.
Yes. The GX30 ARC with a larger 4-inch woofer and 17 watts for each woofer plus 8 watts for each tweeter. As the name implies, these larger self-powered speakers add an HDMI ARC input, all for $300 a pair. Finish options are black or white, available in Q2 2025. I mean, I think the only reason they have an ARC input is because it has to be at this point. They don't make anything that doesn't have an ARC anymore.
But the smaller ones, the $200 GX10s, they do not have that HDMI ARC input. So yeah, you got to go for the slightly larger. I mean, it's still only a 4-inch woofer, so these are not gigantic desktop speakers by any means. And like we say, 17 watts, well, plus another 8 watts there. So 25 watts per speaker in the GX30s there. So I mean, these are meant for near field, no question about it. But at least the price is very reasonable. The looks are nice, so I don't have a problem with these. I mean, it's a perfectly reasonable thing to add to your product lineup. Yeah,
just wait for people to put them on the mantles of their fireplaces, straddling their TVs and complaining about how they can't hear anything. Finish options are black or white, available in Q2 2025. On the other end of the scale, there's a new Onkyo Icon series of 2-channel gear. The Icon P80 is a 2-channel network preamp. Wireless connections include Wi-Fi, AirPlay 2, and Chromecast, plus Bluetooth, of course. It's Rune ready, which is very exciting for a person. And its phono input supports both moving magnet and moving coil. It does get a bit interesting, though, with the addition of HDMI ARC input, and it comes with Dirac Live Limited. You can pay to add Dirac Live Full, as well as bass control and art.
Yeah, that's the first mention I've seen of a brand as large as Onkyo having Dirac Live Art. That's the active room treatment as being available. Gear. Yeah, so it is 2-channel gear, so that's not that many devices to coordinate, and I'm not sure how it's drastically different from bass control at that point, given the limited number of speakers involved, but nonetheless, there it is.
There it is.
Interesting news. It's right there.
We put the sticker on the front. It's fanless as well. And the front panel is 5mm thick piece of aluminum, so it's heavy. So yay. The price is $2,000.
Little bit different from the desktop speakers. Yeah.
Somebody dropped an extra zero in there. It's available in silver or black. It should be just silver if it's got aluminum faceprint. Shut up. And Q4 of 2025 to go along with the P80 is the Icon M80. Should have thought about that name a little bit.
Little bit.
2-channel amplifier, 150 watts into 8 ohms, Class AB, also fanless with a 5mm aluminum front panel. That gets super hot because it's a heat sink. And the front panel has VU meters because what screams unique more than copying Macintosh? It's also $2,000 in silver and black and quarter. Wait a second. Did I do that?
Yep. Nope. That's the same thing.
No, okay. That's it.
So it's $4,000 to get the P80 preamp and the M80 2-channel amplifier together. $4,000 for your 2-channel setup. Yeah.
Lastly, there's the Icon A50 integrated amp. It's A for integrated, and P for pre, and M for explodes. Smash the P80 and M80 together, but knock the wattage down to 140 watts by 2 into 8 ohms, and you have the A50 for $1,500, silver or black, Q4. Honestly, that's the deal.
Yeah,
I mean, why would you buy the other two?
Why need the other ones at drastically more expensive prices? That is pure market
Not drastically
research.
higher wattage, just drastically higher prices.
That is pure market research where they're like, well, an integrated amp with the amplifiers built into the same chassis, that can't be anywhere near as good.
It can't be worth anything. Basically, give it away.
Clearly, it is $500 more just for the preamplifier stage of the very same thing. So, yeah. But good on you, Onkyo. You did your market research.
Way to kill it. You guys tried. You
Man,
tried.
The hype in that press release, they really sounded like it was going to be something you'd never guess, and that it's like the most like obvious.
And then I obviously don't have this experience, and for various reasons, but it's like going on a date and you find out that person who said they were 6 foot is really 5'7". You're like,
sure.
Yeah, no, but I didn't quite live up to the hype. So we did mention Panasonic's TV lineup at CES 2025 last week. The highlight is their new Z95B OLED, which will be available in 55, 65, and 77-inch sizes. It uses the same non-MLA, which is micro lens array, but new 4-layer OLED panel as the LG G5 and M5. And to maximize its light output, Panasonic has made it a lot thicker than other OLED TVs, but that allows for a chimney-like stack effect for better airflow and cooling.
Mm-hmm. Cool air comes in the vents at the bottom and goes up like a chimney out the top.
Well, just think of how great that's going to work over the top of your fireplace. The thicker chassis also means there's room for a full Technics branded Atmos audio system. Just do they just buy the stickers at this point? They just start buying stickers.
Panasonic has long owned Techniques, so I mean that's.
Well, I'm
that's
not talking about that. I'm talking
brand.
about the Atmos part of it.
Oh yeah.
I mean, what's the point? There's a sound bar permanently attached to the bottom edge, side firing, upward firing drivers, which blocks the airflow, but whatever. Drivers covered by a gray fabric finish, and rear firing bass woofers have been moved up and out of the way of the new cooling vents. Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. The Z95B will be available in North America now that Panasonic has returned to the market. Yeah,
that's right.
There you go. Panasonic used to make, reasonable TVs. I have no.
Oh yeah, I mean when Pioneer bowed out, they were certainly the plasmas. You wanted the good plasmas. You got a Panasonic.
So the newest LCD TV tech that you'll actually be able to buy this year was showed by Hisense at the CES. It's a new 116-inch. They just had to be 1 inch bigger than TCL, or they're lying. Just like their hinge profile. I don't know. Which one's hinge? Is that the right one? Which one am I supposed to be talking about?
There's a hinge. That's a
is there a hinge? Is that
that exists?
Does that exist? I don't know. I don't know how these things. I don't know whether swiping left or right is the good one. I was trying to make a joke the other day, and I couldn't figure out which one was the good one. So I don't know. So the UX model for had to be the new 116-inch UX model for 2025 is the first to use RGB Trichroma mini LED backlighting. It's expected to cost around $30,000, which is not bad for a 116-inch TV.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? Those JVC projectors cost that much.
The top one does. That's right.
As the name implies, each local dimming zone will have a red, green, and blue mini LED that can be individually manipulated as the backlight. This is in contrast to today's mini LED backlit TVs that use all blue mini LEDs plus a layer of red and green quantum dots. Now, they are all manipulated together to create white local dimming zones behind the LCD layer. RGB Trichroma backlight ends up sort of looking like a low-resolution color image all on its own, and that requires 2 processing units in the Hisense UX TV. TCL also has an RGB mini LED prototype at CES, but no plans to actually bring it to market this year. So there you go.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I mean, there's only so much you can do because, this is local dimming zones, so they are large. There's not like per pixel. So, if you got a larger area that has a variety of colors, you're still going to end up with it just being white because that's has to be all in common. You're still relying on the red, green, and blue LCD layer to be the actual final shutters. But if you have a swath that is all sort of one color that is larger than a given local dimming zone, then that's where you get this sort of, very low resolution, kind of blurry color image version of it just in the backlight itself. So, what this allows for primarily is larger color volume. You can have very, very bright, very, very saturated, very, very wide colors. So that's the primary advantage of doing things this way is the improved color volume. This is getting us closer to that no tone mapping necessary, just 10,000 nits primary colors type of thing.
Yeah. Great. Mm-hmm. Super excited. This is my excited face.
That's right.
Comments. Jay was watching Sunday Night Football via his over-the-air antenna on NBC. He thought the picture looked a little strange, so he checked his Sony OLED settings and had gone to Dolby Vision Bright for the picture mode. He set it to Dolby Vision Dark, and now it looked great. Mm-hmm. Turns out next-gen TV broadcasts of live sports on NBC are now in Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos. It's 1080p resolution, not 4K, but he still thinks it's pretty cool that they're doing that, and I agree.
That is free if you have an over-the-air antenna and a next-gen TV tuner, so there it is. Dolby Vision, Dolby Atmos coming over the air to your antenna.
Faster than we've ever done it before. We're now on to the questions. I don't think that's true. Anthony in Canada. Anthony has been using Eclipsa. Stop trying to Annexes.
Ah, right.
Anthony.
Yeah. That's definitely the way things are going.
You and Rob. You and Rob are trying to make us the... How many provinces do you have? Like 7?
10
We're going to be the 11th.
3 territories. You can be a territory.
I will agree to be the 13th.
Want to be a southern territory?
I like that number. 13th is a good number. It makes everybody afraid, and that's what I like about it. Anthony in Canada. Anthony has been using Eclipsa Reference 2 series speakers in his wide open living room for a long time now. The ceiling is vaulted, and there are many openings to the rest of the house. And being the living room, acoustic treatments had never been added, so he's always sort of felt like the sound quality was merely okay. Or echoey. Might be... Look, this room is killing me, by the way.
Possibly.
Yeah, his wife wants to get some new furniture. She'd like to rearrange some of the layout. They've discussed the idea of moving the TV and surround system into his family room that is next to the kitchen. The full space in there is roughly 12 by 28. It's rectangular with only one opening and a flat ceiling. So Tony is thinking they might be able to put together a nice Atmos setup in there, although acoustic treatments are still unlikely, given that it's a family room and the rest of the space is the kitchen. His Eclipsa Reference 2 series towers and centers are huge, and neither he nor his wife likes the idea of using them in the family room. They'd be a hindrance to take up way too much floor space. And actually like to set up front 3 speakers that could either wall mount or put on shelves on the front wall. And that would be their best option for flexibility. Onkyo just put out some new speakers you should look at.
Not quite the right choice. No.
He's got an SVS PB2000 to handle the low bass, and that we all worried about floor space. PB2000 is going to take up a bit of it. And it'll all be powered by a Denon X4500H receiver with an external amp, so he can go all the way to 7.1.4 if he wants to. He likes the form factor of the Paradigm Founder series. He's in Canada. Paradigm Founder Series 70 LCR speakers, but he can't help but feel they're a bit overpriced. That's probably true. And we should keep in mind that he is shopping from Canada, so prices and potential cross-border shipping costs are a concern. He's close enough to the U.S. border that he could drive across to pick up something up. Meet me in the Walmart parking lot. So that's the shipping address. Furthermore, they prefer that the surround, back, and ceiling Atmos speakers be in walls and in ceilings. With all that in mind, could we offer some suggestions? He'd mainly like to find his front 3 speakers, but if we can make suggestions for in-wall and in-ceiling speakers to go along with them, that would be great. So Rob's going to have a whole bunch of suggestions for you. So if it wasn't for the Canada thing, I personally think you should be looking at on walls and not in walls as much as possible, simply because of the ease of placement and the flexibility. It's easy to move a speaker over a little bit if it's an on wall.
Sure.
It's very hard to do that once it's in wall, and if you reconfigure your room. Atmos speakers in the ceiling are a little bit less, at least in my mind, because there's such a, they're going to be in front of your couch and behind your couch. I don't think you should. Did he say 6 or 4? Nope. Yeah, 4. So in front of your couch and behind your couch, you have some flexibility in moving that couch around forward and backwards without it really seriously affecting the sound. You have to recalibrate, but less so for the in-ceiling speakers. But again, just remember that just because you can see a space on the ceiling where it can go doesn't mean that it can actually go there. And even if it could, that you could actually get it up there depending on where this family room is in relation to the size of your house, where your roof comes down and all of that stuff. So if it were for the Canada thing, I'd be pointing you towards RBH.
Sure.
Their on-wall speakers are, and I think they have some on-walls these days, the new ones that are...
Oh, yeah. The Impression series.
I would highly recommend those. I just don't know if those are available right now, or how expensive they would be to get to Canada.
Yeah,
but that would be my kind of go-to. And of course, I'm sure Rob's going to say the Sonance Mag 6 ones for the ceiling, while you can still get them.
That would be a trip across the border, because you can sort of track down the Sonance Mag 6 in-ceiling speakers, but not their back cans very easily anywhere in Canada. So that would be a trip across the border down to a Best Buy in whatever state is closest to you across the border there. You could do that for the in-ceiling speakers. That's certainly an option, because I mean the Sonance Mag 6 with the retrofit back cans, that's a very easy installation. You're talking $220 US dollars, but per pair. So you're really really not going to match that price on anything else. And they'll match up with any speakers that are reasonably neutral, be perfectly fine as your Atmos. So price-wise, that's one I definitely would still recommend, the Sonance Mag 6 and the retrofit back cans. And that's, any Best Buy in the States, easy to find.
If you're going across the border anyways, you can still get RBH while you're doing it. So I just want to throw that out there.
Possibly, you'd still have to pay when you come across the border. You'd still have to declare and pay your duties and your taxes. So that's still involved. But yes,
until you annex us.
Right. That's right. Yeah, I'm sure that's the direction it's going to go. But I sort of agree. I think the Paradigm Founder series, I mean, some of the measurements and reviews, it's like, that's kind of the first generation of that Founder series, and maybe there's a little bit of refinement and improvement that Paradigm could do on those, and given that and the price points, I'm not sure that would be my very first choice, although we do get good prices on them in Canada and being a Canadian brand. But I think what I would probably look at here for price and for if you were sort of drawn to that coaxial design, if you're drawn to having the passive radiators that are on the front of the speakers, so that putting the back of it right against a wall, they're not exactly wall mountable just given the size and weight, but certainly could have a shelf on the front wall that's holding these speakers, and they can be physically very close to the front wall. So KEF in their Q series, I think that might be the way to go here. You can buy them direct from KEF in Canada, or of course they are available at many retailers in Canada, but the Q series is more reasonably priced, but with similar designs. Now they do in the current KEF Q Meta series, because that's what we're on right now is the Q Meta series. They have the Q4 Meta model, which is an on-wall speaker model. So like Tom was saying, if it's coming to your surround speakers and it was more about worrying about space constraints than it really was about truly wanting in-walls, then be aware that KEF Q4 Meta speaker in that Q series lineup gives you an on-wall option that might work very nicely. Now, if you're really, really worried about everything matching, I mean, there are lots of Q series in-wall and in-ceiling speaker options from KEF as well. Again, all available direct from KEF. If you don't want to venture to a dealer, you can order them online in Canada and the US these days. They're selling, basically direct to consumers. So that's widely available. It's tough for me to justify the price that they charge on the back cans for Q series, KEF, any of the KEF in-ceiling and in-wall speakers. I think the back can prices are exorbitantly high, but it's easy enough to just look at the dimensions that they're using and make your own. These are ones where you'd have to open up the wall and do some drywall repair afterward. But that's all quite doable. So I think that's a pretty good option that is similar. Now, one other one that would require cross-border shipping, because this is not necessarily a small area that you're trying to fill in. You mentioned like just wanting to have sort of the more compact size. So one other one would still be HSU. Shoe Research. They don't have retailers in Canada. You'd have to order them in the States and either just pay for the shipping it cross-border or have it delivered somewhere in the States and then drive across the border and pick it up yourself. But the CCB8, which are a coaxial design, but it's sort of got the higher efficiency, the higher sensitivity as well that HSU always goes for in their speaker designs. They are kind of big and chunky, so I'm not sure that they match the aesthetic looks that you were going for with either the Paradigm Founders or the KEF Q series. I don't think they look quite as nice aesthetically, but performance for the price wise, those HSU CCB8s could be an option as well. So you can have a look at it. You might just immediately say, nope, those aren't for me, and that's totally fine. But I wanted to mention them because sensitivity wise in particular, they could be a good option.
All right, Tony. First of all, Tony wanted to thank Curtis for providing detailed instructions on how to control the Apple Music app, including Dolby Atmos music, on his Apple TV 4K using his iPad via AirPlay 2 controls. It has been working like a charm. So,
hooray!
Listeners helping listeners. Appreciate
That's
it.
right.
Second, he has resorted to leaving his Samsung TV on all the time while he's just playing background music from his Apple TV 4K, since the Apple TV 4K always puts itself in the standby after seemingly random amounts of time if the TV is off. But since he wants to save electricity whenever he can, and he has a smart plug that lets him monitor his wattage usage, he's found that he can use the TV's built-in YouTube app to show a video of a static black screen, and that uses 40 watts, while his Apple TV 4K's screensaver image uses 140 watts.
Yeah.
So that's his solution for now.
Good enough. Yeah.
Good enough, I guess, as long as you're happy. Third, you appreciate our recommendations of the Fosi TDA 7498E Class D 2-channel amp. He was previously using the otherwise unused Onkyo TX-NR 5100 receiver in pure direct mode just to power his surround back speakers. And he's worried about power.
That's why he wanted something more power efficient.
The Onkyo was drawing around 145 watts, and the Fosi draws about 5. He also discovered that Fosi sells direct to its customers through their eBay storefront, so it was even a bit less expensive than their Amazon price. So now on to his questions. Prior to Curtis's advice about getting Dolby Atmos music to work via AirPlay 2 control from his iPad, he went ahead and purchased a Thunderbolt 3 to HDMI adapter cable to see if he could feed Atmos music directly from his iPad to his Onkyo RZ50 receiver, but it didn't work. However, his M2 MacBook Air showed audio output options that seemed like they would work via Thunderbolt to HDMI cable. Now that his iPad to Apple TV 4K via AirPlay 2 solution is working, he has turned his attention to a different room. It's a small room in which he'd like to set up a 4.1.2 speaker configuration for Atmos music listening at a single seat location, music only, no video or display of any kind. Now that his Onkyo NR51 5100 receiver is freed up thanks to that Fosi amp, he quickly tried things out with his MacBook Air as a source and using that Thunderbolt to HDMI cable. But for some reason, the reason being that Apple sucks, the option to output Dolby Atmos is grayed out. And while he could select Dolby Atmos on HDMI pass-through in Apple Music app on his MacBook Air, he could never get Atmos to show up on the Onkyo's front panel. The MacBook Air does have options to internally decode the audio and output everything in that 5.1.2 configuration, but he's using 4.1.2. I don't think that's a problem, but anyways. No. So do we have any ideas how to fix this and get Atmos music from Apple Music working in this setup? There's no world in which I think that Thunderbolt will go to a HDMI through an HDMI cable and then work properly because Apple won't let it. Let's just start with
it's supposed to work. It's supposed to.
And if it says it'll output 5.1.2, your receiver will put that into 4. It's not like you're going to lose your center channel. I mean,
I think he was concerned about that. So this is a case where the channel count versus speaker count, because that's really what we're talking about here.
Yes.
So can you send a different number of channels to your AV receiver and then output those channels in the signal to a different number of speakers? And the answer is yes, you can. You can absolutely send a 5.1.2. I guess it would just be PCM at that point, right? Because it's fully decoded, uncompressed signal coming out of the MacBook Air. Send that channel count with a discrete center channel in the signal. The AV receiver will have no problem saying, well, I realize I'm running a phantom center here, so it's just going to take that center channel signal and split it between your front, left, and right speakers and still play it back. So that's the same as if you had a Dolby Digital 5.1 signal with a discrete center channel, and you input that bit stream signal to your AV receiver, but configured it that you have no center speaker, that you have front, left, and right speakers, and no physical center speaker. It's not as though that center channel information disappears. Your AV receiver has no problem dividing that center channel signal between your front, left, and right speakers and creating the phantom centers. So if this is the situation, if the pass-through and Dolby Atmos bitstream output is just not available to you, I'm not exactly sure why. Doing the Thunderbolt to HDMI cable conversion is supposed to allow it to work just like an HDMI connection. There's no HDMI port built into the MacBook Air. You really only have Thunderbolt as your option. So if the option is there to do the decoding inside of the MacBook Air computer itself and output a discrete 5.1.2 signal, there's no problem with that. Go ahead and do that. That should work fine. If that's not grayed out, if that's available to you, that is your solution here. And since it is the only source you're going to be using for Atmos music in this room, that's not too much of a problem. So good news on that front.
Yeah. In his home theater with his Onkyo RZ50, he did not bother to rerun all of Dirac. After swapping out the amplifier for his surround back speakers, he just double-checked the trim level to make sure that it matches the rest of his speakers with the Fosi amp now in place. Mm-hmm. That means you did it with a microphone, though, right? You didn't just look at the numbers.
No, I'm making sure that the SPL meter reading
Yeah. Okay. Would it theoretically be better to rerun Dirac? You will probably end up doing so at some point anyway, but realistically, with switching surround back amplifiers the way he has made an audible difference that demands an all-new EQ curve be applied. The only way it would make a difference is if the two amps that you are switching between, one of which would not be linear. They're both linear. It should be the same. And
that is linear across the load that's being applied to it, because I mean, sometimes you'll see under testing, it's like, well, that's a truly constant 8 ohm load from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, and there it's linear. But sometimes if you have wildly swinging impedances in your speaker, not all amps remain completely linear across all load variations in the impedance. So I mean, there's a theoretical chance that there's a minor difference, but I mean, between an Onkyo AV receiver run in pure direct mode to that Fosse Class D amplifier, I mean, it should be negligible differences that are happening there. So you should be fine.
As long as you level match, basically.
That's right. Because I mean, there definitely can be differences in the gain from one amplifier to another, in which case the volume level has now changed.
So for those of you that are like, what the hell are they talking about? So if you say you had two different amps, right, that were powering the two speakers, and you and the amps were being fed by a receiver, and the receiver, of course, has, if you go into like the speaker setup, you select small and all that stuff, and you set it sets trim levels. Your Odyssey or your Dirac or YPOW does that for you these days, but back in the day we used to have to do it manually. So basically, if you take one amp out and then you put another amp in, and you went back to those trim levels and made sure the trim levels were all the same as they were before, which they wouldn't have changed because you just switched out the amp anyways. But let's pretend that you went in there just to double check and you're like, okay, trim levels are the same. I'm good to go. That's not how it works. The output gain from the same input signal out from your receiver to the amplifier can be different because of the gain of the amplifier itself. So what you would have to do is use an SPL meter to send a pink noise or white noise, pink noise, I think, and test the output of the other speakers versus the new amplifier with the new speakers, with the same speakers but a new amplifier attached to them. Make sure that all those things are the same level, and that you adjust the trim levels based on that. That's the only thing you really have to do here, as long as both amplifiers are expected to be or tested to be reasonably level, it's or even or linear. When they are not linear, then you are essentially, one amplifier is is louder in some frequencies than it should be and softer in other frequencies than it should be, and your room correction would have tried to account for that and would have adjusted the EQ based on how non-linear your amplifier is. So if you were to put a linear amplifier on, now you've suddenly made it unlinear.
Yeah.
Okay.
But further than that, in this specific instance, he's also talking about his surround back speakers.
Yeah.
So, if it's in any way a hassle or a commitment of time that you just don't have free right now, I would not be very worried about that whatsoever. If you were changing out your center speaker's amplifier, I might be like, I want to double check. I want to make sure that I haven't messed up the frequency response of my center speaker. But you could mess up the frequency response of your surround back speakers fairly significantly before you'd ever actually notice in real world content. So
Microsoft thinks you can just turn them off and turn on other speakers.
Swap them with your surround speakers. Who's
you won't
even
know this. It's not even necessary. All right. Dirac indicates that in their instructions that your microphone measurement position should be a minimum of 20 inches apart with a maximum of 40 inches apart. He really only cares about a single listening position, but when he did his Dirac measurements, he had the microphone positions, 40 inches apart. And if and when he does redo all of his Dirac measurements in the future, should he make the various microphone positions closer to 20 inches apart or maybe even closer together? Since he only cares about the single listening position, I would do 20. I would be comfortable with 20. I would be comfortable with 12, but yeah.
I mean, the sort of rule of thumb that we've gone by for years, and this applies to Odyssey, it applies to Dirac, it applies to Arc Genesis if you have Anthem, whatever it is, the sort of rule of thumb that we've gone is a 2-foot radius. right? So you've got your primary number one microphone measurement position, and that should be a position that is equidistant from your front, left, and right speakers. It should be right in between your front, left, and right speakers, even if your seats are slightly offset, because sometimes it's a love seat, right? And the point that's exactly equidistant between the front, left, and right speakers is going to be the in between the two couch cushions on the love seat. But mic position number one should be exactly equidistant between your front, left, and right speakers. That's the position that is used to set all of your distance settings by your automatic setup program. So it sets the distance settings, the trim level settings, and all of that is done from mic position number one. So from mic position number one, our rule of thumb has been a 2-foot radius, right? So 2 feet to the left, 2 feet to the right, which generally, if you've got like a 3-seater couch and mic position number one really was, the middle seat on that 3-seater couch, then generally 2 feet to your left, 2 feet to your right is pretty much going to be in the seat to your left and the seat to your right, that type of positioning. And we just sort of keep it all within a 2-foot radius, which is, as like I say, rule of thumb. There are going to be exceptions occasionally, but that works out pretty well. So I mean, that in no way is counter to what Dirac is saying here, right? That between 20 and 40 inches, so that 24 inches would fall within that range. But I think there's a little bit more going on here, right? There's this concept that if I really only care about one seat, then don't I want a tight cluster of measurements that are all close together? And the answer is no. That is a bit of misthinking that's going on there, because we are still trying to get a nice spatial average that is not going to do wonky things with the EQ, that it makes it wildly worse just a little bit to your left and a little bit to your right in an effort to make it considerably better in the single microphone position right in the middle of the single seat that you care about most. I mean, that line of thinking has been going on for ages and ages. We saw it a lot when Odyssey was quite new, because people were like, well, why is Odyssey telling me to take these, 8 different microphone positions, and they show this diagram with these microphones sort of spread out when I really just have this one seat that I care about? Shouldn't I just take the same microphone measurement without moving the microphone ever 8 times in a row and really correct that one location because I don't care too much about the other locations? That's not really what the program is attempting to do. It's not a graphic EQ. It's not an on-axis only frequency response that we're just trying to make into a perfectly flat line. We're trying to look at the spatial average of the room. We're trying to take into account the reflections plus the direct sound. And in order for the processing to do that, it needs to get a bubble of sound that is about a 2-foot radius, give or take. So yeah, we're perfectly in line with Dirac's own instructions there. And yeah, if you don't want to do, to me, 40 inches apart, like a 40-inch radius, that's kind of big. That's a little bit big. You might be getting to the point where it struggles to apply any EQ, because when you're that far apart, like getting close to 4 feet apart, 3 to 4 feet apart in your microphone measurements, it could be that it's like, well, if I, cut the hump that I'm seeing in this position, it's going to result in a bigger dip in this other position. And inversely, if I try to fill in this one dip in this one position, it's going to create a cut in this other position. And it's like, yeah, you kind of want to keep the bubble reasonable. So I think our rule of thumb is fine, and it fits within their own instructions.
Yeah, I linked up the proper microphone positions for home theater AV Gadgets article, where I reference back to our interview with Chris Kiriakakis of Odyssey, and he basically says 1.5 to 3 feet, away, is where it's in, don't go any further than 3 feet away, which would be far. 36 inches, sure, and it can be as close as 18. So 20 is fine. 24, which is what Rob is saying, is also fine. That's right. It all kind of falls in there. But if you want to read about it and have all the explanations and everything else, that's where it is. Okay. So Dirac automatically set his crossover frequency for his front, left, and right Emotiva T3 towers to 70 hertz. He found that surprisingly high, but doesn't have any beef with the results. He had the curtains for the frequency range over which Dirac applies its EQ set to full range. Mm-hmm. He tried measuring with Room EQ Wizard and listened to bass sweeps afterwards to confirm Dirac results with his front speaker set to pure direct and no crossover applied. Room EQ Wizard measured his towers as being fairly flat down to 34, and then having a significant drop off below that. So Then he tried manually setting the curtain for Dirac's EQ to 34 up to 20 kilohertz rather than full range, and he used Dirac's 3 memory presets to quickly switch between the different configurations. No matter what the EQ configurations, Room EQ Wizard measured a similar drop-off from his front towers below 34 hertz, but with his manual curtain applied so that Dirac wasn't correcting anything below 34, there's suddenly a big 8 dB dip at 48 hertz, and it was quite audible too, not just something that could be seen in measurements, but not just something that could be seen in the measurements, but not actually heard. So it
could be heard, is all we're saying. Yeah.
So what's going on here? Is Dirac applying EQ below 70 hertz crossover frequency? And why would no EQ be fairly flat down to 34 hertz? And Dirac full range has a smooth roll-off below 70 hertz crossover, but manually setting the curtain to 34 hertz suddenly results in a big audible dip at 48 hertz. I don't know what this curtain thing is. I don't know what that curtain thing means.
Well, that's similar to like if you're using the Odyssey Editor app, where you can say, okay, instead of applying EQ over the entire audible frequency range, only apply the EQ between these curtains that I set on the low end and the high end, right? Only do your processing in there. So, I mean, when you have a crossover set, Dirac absolutely is applying EQ over the entire range, below the crossover as well. It's not as though it gets to the crossover frequency and goes, whoops, I stopped because there's a crossover now. It's like, no, the crossover needs to be a smooth crossover. So if you have humps and dips below the crossover region, you still want those equalized so that you get a smooth roll off below the crossover frequency, not a roll off below there that has humps and dips in it still, because the speakers are still contributing to the sound below 70 hertz in this case. It's not that they're contributing no sound at all. It's just that it's getting quieter and quieter. But you still want it to be you want it to be a line of a hill going down, not a big thing with scoops and bumps and humps and dips in it. So yes, it absolutely is still applying there. I'm not exactly sure why it was so significant, because I mean, of course, 48 hertz is still above 34 hertz. So even if you set the curtain at 34 hertz, why is it allowing for this 8 decibel dip at 48 hertz?
I wonder if that was a measurement anomaly during that one particular
that's
running of a Dirac or that he's doing. I wonder if that's what it is.
Yeah, that's a slightly out of place, that it's that significant, that it's that large. But the notion that you need to curtain off the bottom end to have it not applying any EQ, below where the speakers are naturally rolling off without any EQ whatsoever, there's no need to do that. There's no need to curtain the bottom end like that whatsoever. Let it apply all the way down to 0 hertz if it wants to. But it's good that it has the crossover set at what is really quite a reasonable frequency to choose given the room that you're in.
Yeah. He had a professional hearing test not too long ago, and at 52 years old. By the way, I don't say that anymore. I say 50 plus.
Gotcha.
So you are 50 plus, and you can remain 50 plus until the day you die, as far as I'm concerned.
It is truthful.
The test indicated he's not hearing much of anything above 10 kilohertz anymore. Any chance either of us had a hearing limit test recently and would care to share the results? I had one in Jacksonville before we moved to Australia, and
that's a little while ago.
Experience, it was a long time ago. My experience with the audiologist was that he was not convinced. The headphones they used were not good enough to really reproduce anything above a certain amount.
About 8 kilohertz is where they tend to care about.
And they are not, anything above that those headphones might be creating or might not be creating. It might be just noise or nothing. You know what I mean? It's not necessarily the pure signal that you're expecting, the pure sound wave that you're expecting. So if the thing's trying to make a 20 hertz, like I could hear pretty clearly up to 15, 16, maybe 18. I don't remember. I still have it someplace at that time, which was 20 years ago. Was that right? No, it's not. 15 years ago.
15, yeah.
And I could hear pretty clearly up to that point, but he was like, I don't know if you're hearing that or if the headphones are just buzzing and you're hearing the noise and not the actual sound. So I don't know what your audiologist told you or what headphones you were using, but the headphones they're using are not like professional, calibrated monitoring headphones, because they're really just looking for deficiencies in
the vocal
audible range that everybody hears. And those are easy for even crappy headphones to reproduce.
That said, 10 kilohertz at 52 years old, it wouldn't be surprising if you do have most of your hearing gone above that. We're talking about the last octave, 10 kilohertz to 20 kilohertz, but that wouldn't be surprising if that is the case. And I haven't had my hearing tested recently. I should go have another hearing test. But yeah, it's doubtful that they'd really know above 10 kilohertz with any accuracy.
Yeah. He measured the mid-range and treble response in Room EQ Wizard with Dirac full range on versus... This seems out of place. Why does that other question
I just went in the order that the email went, so on this one.
It's just like... And now for something completely different.
A little aside. That's fine. I broke it up.
So he measured the mid-range and treble response in Room EQ Wizard with Dirac full range on versus Dirac completely off between 300 hertz and 3 kilohertz. The frequency response pretty much overlapped. Mm-hmm. And above 3 kilohertz, Dirac on was slightly boosting the output versus Dirac off with a max delta of about 3 dB at 8 kilohertz. So he tried manually EQing the EQ curtain to 3 kilohertz, and subjectively he thought it maybe sounded a little bit less bright, although he wouldn't swear to it. But what he would swear to is that with Dirac on, his phantom center image sounded pinpoint, but also very narrow, whereas with Dirac off, the phantom center image seemed considerably wider, but not as pinpoint precise when sitting right in the middle. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Is it just a slight boost to the treble frequencies by Dirac entirely responsible for that change in the width of the imaging, or is Dirac doing some phase stuff that's also responsible? Well, by turning it off, you're certainly limiting what it can do. It's just going to start with that.
That's just it, though. Yeah.
But the phantom center, there is almost certainly some sort of phase-related things that are happening here, and that slight brightening in the top end is pretty typical of all EQs, really. They do want you to be able to hear those high frequencies a little bit better, and is that making it
alone could be because if you get so if you just forget EQ for a second, you have two different speakers, and one of them has very, very linear extended high frequency response, and another one has a high frequency roll off, which is very common. Very often the one with the high frequency roll off, you'll be like, "Ooh, that had a wider sweet spot." That's pretty common, that the ones with the high frequency roll-off, it sounds like it has a wider sweet spot, but then not quite as pinpoint precise. So, either could be true or both could be true in this case. There could be, because, Dirac is doing some phase manipulation. That is part of it. But 3 decibels is audible in the treble range. At 8 kilohertz, 3 decibels is readily audible. That is something that in a blind comparison, you could reliably detect a 3 decibel difference at 8 kilohertz. So the notion that it's frequency response alone, amplitude alone that is responsible for that imaging difference is not out of the question either. That does make sense. It could be as simple as that.
Yeah. He's seen how some people recommend always curtaining off the upper frequency EQ limit to around 400 hertz or something. That's like that room.
The transition
thing.
Frequency.
That's it.
Yeah.
What's that whole room dimension limit thing called again? Oh, well,
the transition frequency.
Do we recommend this practice? I do not. And that it's not just, well, that's what I say. It's not only because I'm too lazy to do stuff like that, because I think I just don't think it's worth it. I feel like this is one of those academic things that people are like, well, mathematically, blah, 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 but you probably can't hear it. Okay, you should have just said, you probably can't hear it, so do whatever the heck you want. And that's basically where I land on this. I've not seen or heard anything that convinced me that this was something that would make an audible, substantive difference in my system. Therefore, I do not do it.
Sometimes
and I don't
audible,
really care.
but not necessarily important.
Substantive.
There's a difference. Sometimes there's a difference between audible and important. So a lot of this sort of harkens back to Dr. Floyd Toole's research, where he's advocating for linear speakers, tell it like it is, with wide, even dispersion. And the point that's being made here is that below the room's transition frequency, which is determined by the dimensions of the room, what we're talking about there is, at some point, the length of the waves, of the sound waves, as we get lower and lower frequencies, the waves get longer and longer. At some point, the length of that wave exceeds the smallest dimension of your room, which is typically the height of your room. So once the wavelength exceeds the the dimension of the room, at that point, you are never hearing that frequency as only a direct line from speaker to ear. At that point, you are always hearing some reflection of the room because the wave literally couldn't form within the smallest dimension of your room. It had to reflect off something before it made its way to your ear. So that's the transition frequency of the room. And what the research has shown is that below that frequency, at these lower ranges, when you're applying like static EQ, an infinite impulse response, an IIR filter, that works really well because it's sort of a constant that's always happening, and that works really well. But above that frequency, you are hearing the direct line sound that just went from the speaker to ear, in addition to the reflections. And the higher and higher we go in frequency, the more and more we're hearing only the direct sound as a loose rule of thumb. So they're saying when you start applying EQ to the higher frequencies, you're getting more into speaker correction than you are room correction, right? So they're saying that if you purchased your speakers for a specific reason, if they have a non-linearity that you just happen to like in the treble, well, now if you're applying EQ above the room's transition frequency, you're EQing that out of the speaker. So you're doing away with the thing that might have gotten you to choose that speaker in the first place. And then in addition, you start getting into some trouble when you try to EQ speakers that don't have even dispersion, because now what are you correcting? Are you correcting only the on-axis frequency response? Or are you trying to correct the off-axis or the combination of on-axis and reflected? And it starts getting a little complicated in there. But where all of this takes a practicality backseat to the real-world results is going back to that we're measuring a bubble. We're not just measuring one microphone position or two microphone positions that line up with our ears if our head was in a vise, right? If we're measuring a bubble of sound, we're measuring a spatial average, what you'll tend to find is that, okay, at this one location, maybe I would have applied a little EQ bump in the frequency response at this one mic location. But then at a different mic location, I need to do the inverse of that. And you end up with this spatial average that tends to not do very much EQing to the treble frequencies because you mostly get these humps and dips in the measured frequency response that are different from mic location to mic location because of the reflections changing. The relative distance from that tweeter to the reflected spot to the microphone position, it keeps changing every time you move the microphone. So you get these different peaks and valleys in the treble response that all kind of averages out to the EQ not doing a heck of a lot of EQing in the mid-range and treble unless there's something that is consistently uniformly very off versus the target curve, which, tends to be just a smooth, flat line, right? So if there's something way off consistently, I kind of want to EQ that. And the rest of it, practically speaking, kind of just averages itself out and doesn't mess things up too badly at all. So practically speaking, I don't see much reason to curtain off the high frequencies. There is the theory, and I get it, and it makes sense on that level, but practically speaking, I don't think you need to do it.
So what I said, but longer.
That's right.
Basically. Terry has some has come across mentions of 4 ohm nominal speakers being harder to drive than 8 ohm nominal speakers. And he's sometimes seen the warning that you shouldn't connect a whole bunch of 4 ohm speakers to an AV receiver because they can be difficult to drive. But most AV receivers list both an 8 ohm and a 4 ohm wattage rating, and the 4 ohm wattage is always higher. Mm-hmm. So what's so bad about connecting a whole set of 4 ohm speakers to an AV receiver? What about the ratings that make them hard to drive? So the idea here is not that receivers have more power for 4 ohm speakers than 8 ohm speakers, or amplifiers have more power. It's that the 4 ohm speakers require or pull more power or demand, I don't know, more power for the amplifiers because of the low impedance. And that low impedance makes them hard to drive in that it requires more power to get them because of their low impedance. It requires more power. And at some point, your amp will run out of power.
Yeah, it's the difference between amperage, really. Like one sort of fun way to think about electrical power is like, imagine there's a wall and you're trying to get water over that wall. So the wall is the impedance, right? So you can raise or lower the height of that wall, and that's analogous to the rising or lowering of the impedance that we're talking about, 8 ohms versus 4 ohms or 16 or whatever it might be. Now, the voltage is like the water pressure behind that wall. And in this case, that voltage is kind of staying the same. That's just the signal. That's just the audio signal. So it's varying along with the audio signal, but that voltage is kind of staying the same. The water pressure is staying the same. The amperage is how much actual water, like how many molecules of water get over that wall. That's the amperage in this analogy. So you can imagine if you have a lower wall and the water pressure is staying the same, more water is getting over that wall. So where is all that water coming from? Well, it's coming from the wall outlet. It's coming from our power supply, and it's coming from the wall outlet. And how much actual water, how much actual electricity can come out of that wall outlet is a fixed amount. That you can only pull so much out of the wall. There's only so much available in the reservoir. So the ratings that we see on AV receiver, you'll notice it's a 2 channels driven. You might have 11 amplifiers or 15 amplifiers built into an AV receiver these days, but the rating, the specification is for 2 of those channels being driven. Now,
sometimes your AV only at 1 kilohertz.
So. Possibly, but yeah. So, I mean, your AV receiver will have no problem driving 2 4-ohm nominal speakers. No problem whatsoever. You can connect a pair of 4-ohm speakers to any decent AV receiver and no problem at all. But you start connecting 7, 9, 11, 15 to that AV receiver, it can power them, but only so much reservoir is available if you actually had an all channels driven for some reason, which is really, really rare. But if for some reason that happened, you're just going to run out of water in the reservoir. That's what's going to happen. Whereas if you had the higher impedance, you might be able to do it because you've got this higher wall. There's less water going over that wall in a higher impedance speaker type of situation. So that's what's going on there. That's what makes it harder to drive is if you follow that analogy.
Yes. So it's been mentioned that if you are comparing speaker sensitivity ratings, you need to subtract 3 dB if it's a 4 ohm speaker versus an 8 ohm speaker. Why is that?
So this is coming from, we used to rate speakers at a sensitivity of 1 watt from 1 meter away. And a watt, like definition-wise, is a volt times an amp equals a watt.
Yeah.
Into 1 ohm. So 1 volt times 1 amp into 1 ohm gives you 1 watt. Now we start changing the ohms, and you can see how the wattage starts changing if the voltage is fixed. So these days, what they'll usually list is instead of 1 watt at 1 meter, they'll list 2.83 volts at 1 meter. Now 2.83 volts, that being a fixed amount, if we are still changing the impedance, if we're changing that ohm number, now we are actually changing the wattage. So instead of it being 1 watt going into 8 ohms or 1 watt going into 4 ohms, now it's 2.83 volts going into 8 ohms or 2.83 volts going into 4 ohms. And when you keep the voltage fixed like that, what you end up with is 1 watt into 8 ohms or 2 watts into 4 ohms. We've kept the voltage the same, but like we said, there's more amperage making it into that lower impedance speaker. So when you multiply the volts by the amps, you get more watts going into that lower impedance speaker. So now what we're saying is it's a sensitivity of, let's say, 89 decibels at 2.83 volts into this 8 ohm speaker from 1 meter away, versus if it were 89 decibels at 2.83 volts into a 4 ohm speaker from 1 meter away. Well, that's what's happening when there's 2 watts going into that 4 ohm speaker, not 1 watt anymore. And if we equaled it out, 1 watt and 1 watt again, we went back to it being 1 watt at 1 meter, we've gone from 2 watts into the 4 ohm speaker to half that amount of power, 1 watt. Now that's a 3 decibel difference. For every doubling of power, you get 3 decibels more. So that's where that math comes from. We're saying with that 2.83 volts now being the fixed figure that we're using, into a 4 ohm speaker, that's twice as many watts as into an 8 ohm speaker.
Yup. I know you guys were on YouTube were like watching me walk out of the room. I'm like, I know what this explanation is, and I need more coffee anyways. You know, I don't know. people get so tied up in these measurements.
No, that one I like because that is confusing. If you're just seeing those ratings,
I'm not saying anything about this particular, but it's it's like it's not as easy to compare apples to apples.
That's
as it is just whenever, like I've said a million times on this podcast, and I say it throughout my daily life constantly. Every time you say just, you're oversimplifying vastly the complexity of the issue at hand. I just want to compare these two speakers. So give them both 1 watt and we'll see, how loud they are. And then then you end up with all these measurements. Or like I compare them all and look at this one's better than that one. Oh, but you didn't take this into consideration. You take this into consideration. If you did that, then you would see
limiting variables to one variable change is not as easy as we want it to be. That's scientific rigor.
It's right. Sasi says, and Aaron from Aaron's Audio Corner posted his clipable measurements of the famous, whatever, Yamaha NS10 studio monitors. They show a very pronounced hump in the upper mid-range, which you can see on the YouTube video or the Flickr album. Sasi has heard about how the NS10s have been widely used in many mixing studios to approximate the sound of low-quality playback systems, such as clock radios, cheap car stereos. They always say clock radios. I don't think they really mean that. But anyways,
they did at the time. In the 80s, it was clock radios.
Clock radios were also a lot better than what they are now. I just bought some. They are garbage. Anyways... clock radios, cheap car stereos, and built-in TV speakers. He had a conversation with the music producer, and what Sasi gathered from that conversation is that during the mixing phase of production, getting the mid-range instruments and vocals to sound good together in the mix is absolutely critical, particularly for having the mix translate well to just about any kind of playback system. And then they worry more about the bass and treble in the mastering phase, so he can sort of understand how the common practice of using these Yamaha monitors came to pass. And of course, Dr. Floyd Toole has written about the circle of confusion and the problem of using nonlinear speakers to mix and master the recordings, which are then played back on speakers that are also nonlinear but in a different way. Kind of like what we were talking about with that amplifier earlier.
Yep.
Or perhaps one or the other is linear but not both, and like we were talking about with the amplifier earlier. And there's a constant back and forth of trying to anticipate what the other side will be using so that you can hear what you were, so that they can hear, or that you can hear as a mixer, what you were supposed to hear. So it occurred to Sasi was the prevalence of using these Yamaha NS10 studio monitors during the 80s and 90s with their heavily boosted mid-range. The reason why so many people always created V-shaped target EQ targets or favoring boosting both the bass and treble tone controls in their gear. I must have misread that somehow because it doesn't make any sense to me. But I know what he's saying. He's saying smiley faced.
Yeah.
Back in the 80s and 90s, the Kenwood, and I always say Kenwood, though I know there's a bunch of different brands out there, but the Kenwood like audio stack that you could buy from the Sears catalog, which I only looked at 3 parts of the Sears catalog. It was the audio, the toys, and one other part. And
you can guess.
And the audio one, they always had these stacks, right, with the record player on top, and eventually they had cassette players. And then usually an amplifier, a preamp, an EQ, and the EQ always had that nice, they had the glowing sliders that you could slide, right. And the more sliders, the better. And whenever you went to somebody's house, and because I didn't have one, because reasons, we were poor, and they always had the smiley face on there. And the reason was always given, it's because they make the mid-range too hot in the original masters when they release it, so you have to compensate for it. But that we know that's kind of, I mean, in the 80s and 90s, it was largely because a lot of speakers didn't have deep bass and high treble. that was more the reason than compensating for the mixes. But that's not what they said. They said they always blamed everything but their equipment.
Yeah. But going by that, it was really rare for someone to have a subwoofer, right? So if you wanted deep bass response, you were boosting the heck out of the bass tone control or putting a big old boost at the bottom end of your smiley face EQ curve. Yeah. And then a lot of speakers, tweeters were not great in the 80s. They did not extend up past about
and look at the design of those speakers. They there was no way to really test these things as far
Yeah.
as like lobing and crosstalk and comb filtering and stuff like that. So
And since it was so easy to blow up tweeters back then, a lot of them just had a straight up resistor just attached in series to the tweeter so that they wouldn't explode, but that also made them crazy quiet at the high end there. So yeah, that was the reason for the V-notched type of EQ curves. It was the speakers that people had at home. It really wasn't the mixes.
Yeah. So speaking of the differences between mixing and mastering phases of making a recording, he's seen how a lot of mastering studios use what might be considered audiophile speakers as their primary monitors, such as Abbey Road, famously using Bowers & Wilkins 800 series diamond towers. Mm-hmm. Scrolling. Certified recently measured the latest Bowers & Wilkins 805 D4 signature towers, and their frequency response was almost like an inverse of those Yamaha NS10s monitors with a big old mid-range dip. So, must be better because it's not, it's the opposite of the bad one. That's what you want. Brent Butterworth and Dennis Berger talk about it in their podcast, but Brent pointed out that even though he would personally favor them and their measured response, he's heard lots and lots of music that's been mastered on those B&W towers or other nonlinear speakers, and the final mix still comes out fine. You've also heard tons and tons of stuff that have been mixed on those Yamaha NS10s, so shut up. Mm-hmm. So I don't mean Bret, but I'm just saying in general. So how is that possible? Is it actually intentional, using speakers that emphasize the mid-range during mixing, but then using speakers that de-emphasize the mid-range during mastering? And then again, there are mastering studios that use Genelecs or Revel Salons or other speakers that we know measure very linear and flat and echoically. So what do we make of this whole situation?
They are tools, and there are human beings involved, and human beings are very, very variable. Yeah,
right. And not. Yeah. There's. It implies that what's happening is that there is a set of speakers in this room, and that is what is used. Full stop. Right. That is only thing they use in this way, like the Abbey room. There's no other speakers allowed in that room. They're not allowed to put any other speakers
or
in
that they
room.
listen to it on nothing else before, saying that's the final master and we're done.
Yes, yeah. I'm done. Like they're not going to put headphones on at some point, or they're not going to take it and put it in their car and listen to it on the way home.
A lot take their mix and they play it in their car just to see how it sounds in there. They're not necessarily saying that like this is for sure what it's going to sound like, but they're like there was an instrument that I want to be able to hear. I'm going to listen into my car that I know is not linear, and I want to be able to make sure that one instrument or that one voice is still audible even in this playback scenario.
I remember many years ago there was a very famous picture that was floating around of some guy stupidly overpriced home theater where he had like full range towers, like all the way around. It was, they just massive towers with amplifiers, like right next to each tower, like huge monoblock amplifiers, or maybe stacks of them to power the 3-4 way or whatever the heck it was in there, all this other stuff. And then you're like, oh my God, people go, oh, life goals, I want to have that, blah, 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 blah. And you look at it, and then underneath all those comments from all those people, there'd be like, there are no wires anywhere in the system. This is a completely wireless system. So the fact that you see a picture of Abbey Road with somebody sitting there looking like they're mixing something.
Well, they do use those B&W speakers.
I'm not saying they don't use them, but I'm saying that's not that picture is staged in such a way to make sure that that's what you're seeing, because I guarantee you that getting those B&W speakers was not either cheap, nor was it without some let's say agreements to make sure that they are that they are going to be featured there, because if not, then B&W is going to be like, give me our speakers back. So
yeah, more than that, it's like, imagine there's a sculptor, right? The sculptor is right up close to let's say it's marble that they're sculpting, and they've got a variety of tools that they use, and they're right up close to it. That doesn't mean they intended for you to see the final result from as close as they were working on it. Right? They want you to view it from a step back, at least, right? They're expecting that you are a distance away viewing their final result, and people are so worried about this is the way they worked on it, so isn't that the type of minutia that I should be viewing it at? And
Right.
the answer is no, that wasn't the intention. The intention was for you to view it from a distance away. So again, like, these are the tools that they're using. They're used to it, right? They're like, if it sounds this way in my studio, then I have enough experience to know that when a person plays it through their TV speakers, through their headphones, through their car stereo, through their Bluetooth speaker, through their clock radio, through whatever it is, that it's gonna sound like the most important parts are going to come through no matter what they play it on, and the better their sound system, the better it's going to sound in the final mix. I know that because I have the experience to know the tools that I'm using. It's not necessarily that I want it to sound exactly the way it sounds in this studio.
Yeah. I mean, imagine it this way. Imagine if they make a mix and it sounds perfect, and they go and they listen to it in their car or on some headphones or something like that. They're like, I can't hear this one thing I want to hear. So they go back into the mixing studio and they bump up that one thing they want to hear. Yep. And they go back into their car. They're like, now I can hear it. It sounds great. And then they put it back on those B&Ws. And they're like, oh.
Yeah. But
so
now I know. Now I know whenever I want that instrument or that voice to stick out in this mix, that's how it's going to sound on this B&W playback system.
Right.
It doesn't sound great in here.
So they have to make some compromise, right?
That's right. But now I have that experience as a mixer or a mastering engineer, and now I understand my tools and they're consistent for me, and now I know what I need to do in this room to get the results in somebody else's room.
Every once in a while, I see a post of somebody with a picture of like 3 or 4 tape measures all together, and how they don't, the first inch or however many centimeters of this for you guys doesn't line up perfectly.
Right.
And they're like, oh, this is why I don't trust whatever it is, scientist or something. I don't know, that the earth is round or something. And I'm like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how that it's a little bit inaccurate, as long as it's consistently inaccurate. And that if you only use that one tool, it will always be consistently inaccurate in
all
that
your
one
cuts
way.
will be equal.
Yeah, they will. You'll still come out with a house that is square, or a picture frame that is square, or whatever. As long as it's consistent, and that's what we're really kind of talking about here. So Sasi heard about how Infinite Gary had recently acquired Philharmonic Audio BMR series speakers. Sasi visited the Philharmonic room at Capitol Audio Fest and got to talk to Dennis Murphy, the founder and famous speaker designer, in person. When Sasi was in college, he bought a pair of Philharmonic affordable accuracy bookshelf speakers, which were the inexpensive Pioneer Andrew Jones BS22 bookshelf speakers, with the tweeters and crossovers replaced by Dennis Murphy and sold at a modest price increase. Sadly, someone stole those speakers while he was at college, but they were Sasi's first exposure to something better than Logitech computer speakers, and he was able to let Dennis know how they opened up a whole new interest and hobby for him, so that was pretty cool. And then Dennis gave him a whole bunch of speakers for free. No? No.
Not quite.
He appreciated how, compared to so many other rooms in the audio store, Philharmonic's room wasn't filled with a bunch of frills and BS. He was using topping equipment, which Audio Science Review has measured as being extremely linear and low in distortion. The amplifiers were Purify Eigentakt.
Yes, Eigentakt.
Class D amplifiers. That is the Germanest word I've ever seen.
It is, yes.
It's very German. And they were using the same Van Alstyne ABX speaker, Alstyne ABX speaker comparator switch that both Aaron from Aaron's Audio Corner and Brent Butterworth have mentioned using. One thing Sasi noticed is they had 3 different Philharmonic speaker models set up for demonstration: the BMR models, the BMR towers, and HT towers, and they had set them up so that each pair was the same distance apart. In other words, the pair of monitors on the were both the leftmost speakers. The BMR tower were both the right to the monitor of the monitors, and the HT tower pair were both to the right of the BMR tower. So it went bookshelf tower, smaller tower on both sides. Anyways, just like that. An asymmetrical arrangement, whereas other rooms they would have their 2 or 3 speaker models arranged symmetrically. Yeah. Which placement approach do we think is better? Okay. As long as they're level matched, it doesn't really matter. As long as they're level matched, it doesn't really matter, especially if there's only one seat you care about. I would prefer, generally speaking, this setup, but there's not enough width in the room.
There's some compromise in either case.
Yes,
for sure.
I'd rather have this configuration in such a way that the width between the two speakers is such that it's enough. And right now, what ends up happening is the middle ones are kind of like the right width apart, and the ones that are in the inside and the outside, depending on which one you're looking at.
They're the same widths apart, but they're off-centered.
They're off-centered so much as to make a more of a difference in my mind, at least. But as long as they're level matched, it shouldn't really make any.
Yeah, I mean, the real issue is boundary. That's what's going on. Which and the boundary reinforcement really only impacts the bass to any large audible degree. So what happens is in the symmetrical setup, right, where you've got the pair of speakers you got speakers pair number 1 are directly to the left and right of the center, and then speaker pair number 2 are both to the outsides of speaker pair number 1. You got that symmetrical placement. Well, speaker pair number 2, they are necessarily closer to the side walls than both of speaker pair number 1. So if you're trying to do some kind of critical listening comparison, speaker pair number 2 is always going to seem like it has more bass because both speakers are closer to the side walls. Whereas this asymmetrical placement, you mildly avoid some of that because you got one speaker is closer to the wall, but then the other, its counterpart on the other side is farther away from the wall, and you go across there. So there's a little bit more equality in the boundary effect, but it's still off center and uneven from left to right. So that's a compromise as well. So there's no perfect solution to this, but I guess if I were to do it, I would probably favor what Philharmonic has done here.
Yeah. So Sasi wants to put just a pair of speakers, no subwoofer, in his bedroom for 2-channel listening. He's keen to try a pair of speakers with true ribbon tweeters for the first time, so he's naturally looking at the Philharmonic BMR monitors or the Ascend Sierra 2 EX-V2 bookshelf speakers. We should really talk about Ascend more on this podcast.
Right, yes.
Can we help him decide? Rob thinks that just anything but the Ascend, because as a Canadian, he hates them. He's going to annex them. He's going to annex the scent. He kind of prefers the physically smaller size and bamboo cabinet material of the Ascends, but he likes the curved shape, gloss finish, and potentially the deeper bass extension of the Philharmonics. The room is 12 by 15 by 9. He doesn't care about the price difference. What do we think he should get? I like bamboo more than I like gloss, so I'm going to go with this Ascend. Personally,
yeah, I mean, I totally get the question that he's asking. It's really tough for me to ever say that I don't want a subwoofer, because I'm going to try to find a way to put a subwoofer in every room. But so if you're saying I don't want a subwoofer, therefore I want to try and find speakers that play lower all on their own. I get that line of thinking. It's just not one that I can personally get on board with, because you're not hearing just the speaker, right? As soon as you get below the transition frequency of the room that we talked about, you're hearing the contribution of the room so much that it's really dependent on that. And it's so easy to get in this situation where I set up my pair of speakers for good imaging. You're clearly going to set these up to have the best stereo imaging that they can. Sometimes the speaker that all on its own plays lower than the other speaker sounds worse because it's going away, playing as low as it possibly can because you don't have a subwoofer or a crossover applied. And where it sounds best for stereo imaging happens to be a really bad spot for the bass, right? You got some huge hump that results or some huge dip that results. And it actually sounds better to use the speaker that has not as much bass extension, because then it just isn't exciting that same room mode that the one that plays lower. And we don't know. Sometimes you luck out, and where it sounds good for stereo imaging in a room, you get pretty darn good deep bass extension that doesn't have wild humps or dips in it. Sometimes you're that lucky, but sometimes you're not. And the only real way to make sure that you're not is to always set the speakers to small, apply a crossover, and have a subwoofer handle the deep bass and set things up that way. So yeah, it's tough for me to get on board here. I'd rather favor getting the ones that cost a little bit less, fit more easily, are easier to set up for that perfect stereo imaging, and then take the cost savings and spend it on a subwoofer and find a way to put it in there. So for that reason, I end up favoring the Ascends in this case, but I get where you're coming from, but I think I'd favor the Ascends.
There's a lawnmower going back and forth.
You've been looking at something.
I think he's only got one more pass left.
Okay. So I'm not hearing it on your microphone, so I think we're all
That's
right.
Good, because it's certainly loud enough from where I'm sitting. A friend of Sasi's is planning to add a second pair of surround speakers since he has 2 rows of seats. He has an Emotiva XBA. Well, I guess maybe one more. He's just going to sit here in front of my window.
That one I can actually hear a little bit. It's not bad, though. You've got a directional microphone.
I know. Friend of Sasi's playing a second pair of surround speakers since he has 2 rows of seats. He has the Emotiva XPA 7 Gen 3 amplifier to power them. He's using Revel W893 in-wall speakers or whatever. For some reason, his friend is insistent that the 2 surround speakers on each side should be wired in parallel, not in series. This is not your friend. You're no longer friends with this person. Sasi told him to follow our advice and wire them in series, but his friend disagrees. How does it feel being friends with somebody who's so blatantly and deliberately wrong? So fine, and it's a system after all, but Sasi looked at the impedance measurements on these particular in-wall speakers. They appear to dip down to about 3.4 ohm in the 80 to 200 hertz region. So even with the 80 hertz crossover applied, wiring 2 of these speakers in parallel is going to result in a 1.7 ohm low around 200 hertz, right? Yep. Is that like literally dangerous for his friend's Emotiva amplifier? Should he try it one more time to convince him to wire it in series? No, let him burn up his freaking house for all I care. Sorry. Sorry, I take it back.
Yeah. Insensitive.
That was insensitive. I'm sorry. Badly. Let him burn up his amplifier for all you care.
Right. He'll be fine. These are surround speakers. They're not playing constantly.
And they're not playing very loud.
In all likelihood. Yeah. The Emotiva amp can drive a 2 ohm load without much problem at all. So, it's not like particularly unsafe or anything. I would still say, of course, wire them in series. It's that much easier. But if your friend is insistent, then there's not anything particularly dangerous about this. No.
Why, though?
I don't know.
Why? What?
I'm not going to worry about it at this point.
No, I know. I'm not really worried about it either, but it's funny to me how people get hung up on stuff. Like, they get super duper invested as if it's a personal attack against them if you suggest something different. Somebody asks your advice and then you tell them and they're like, well, I'm not going to do it that way. Okay. All right. Yeah. So then why did you ask? Why did you ask?
They wanted confirmation. That's usually what's going on.
But why are they so insistent on it being, you're like, well, Tom, you're insistent. You're right. I am right. That's the difference. It's an older article now, but back in 2019, Dr. Floyd Toole revealed the updates he had done to his home's main listening room when he added a turn-off processor and more speakers and subwoofer to make it into an immersive audio setup. His towers are upside down.
They are.
It's still the same living room, open to the kitchen on the right-hand side, and Dr. Toole has shown in the past when it was still just a 7.1 setup, and Sasi has always found it interesting how normal it looks, but also it appears that a large percentage of the surfaces in Dr. Toole's room remain reflective and untreated.
It is a vaulted ceiling, no treatments up there. It's a tile floor. He's got a rug over it. Bare walls. Appearing bare walls, anyway.
Yeah.
Yep. Those are some inverted tower speakers elevated up off the floor.
They are inverted tower speakers, which is hilarious, but yes. So it's Revel Ultima 2 speakers on the floor level. We're going to put it in quotes because they're sitting on top of something upside down. Inverted Salon 2 tower is attached to the front wall. And Gem 2 wide surrounds and surround backs perform a 3 series elevation speakers with front heights, rear heights, and the center height for an in-ceiling Voice of God speaker for Aura 3D. But he's loving all those So You Think You Can Dance movies. Then there are 4 subwoofers hidden within the front and back wall designs. Dr. Toole mentions how his front and especially his back wall contain most of the acoustic treatments for the room, but it's all visually hidden. And then, even though he favors retaining the side wall first reflections for 2-channel music listening, his right wall is open to the kitchen, so he balanced that out to some degree with triple-lined drapes over the windows on the left. And then there must be like the lead-lined ones that you wear when you go to the dentist and they give you a X-ray. And then for multi-channel listening, he's fine with having the side wall first reflections absorbed, so he mostly uses Aura 3D up mixing to listen to music. Oh, God help us all. He also has a thick felt pad under the rug that covers the front area of his tile floor, and his room's overall decay time is around 0.4 seconds. So Sasi, we're just curious to hear what we think of the room. What aspects do we like or find like the most or find the most interesting? I mean, I think the upside down towers are the most interesting by far, but that's
it is fun. Yep.
And would we venture to say that we might do and would we venture to say what we might do differently if it were our room? So this is like the wrong podcast for this question, to be dead honest with you.
Okay.
We often advocate for people to do what you can with the space you have and not get so tied up in the way things should be or what they, the way that, it is the technically optimal way to do a thing, but isn't necessarily the most realistic. So in this space where he has an open side wall and a wall to the left that he has to deal with, he's done what I would have recommended done. He put some sort of absorption on that left wall,
and
to
it's
try
windows
to
there,
balance
so it does make sense for them to be drapes for sure.
It does, and yes, drapes. Most people are like, "What drape should I get?" They don't want you to say get 3 layers of drapes, so that
actually has
he's
some
already
acoustic
doing
impact.
more than you. Let's start with that.
And one thing that I love is that you don't see it on the front and back wall, but those are actually heavily treated front and back walls. So that's where he's put in the effort to lower the decay times in this room overall. 0.4 seconds is, it's like generally they say target between 0.3 and 0.5, 300 to 500 milliseconds. 500 milliseconds is starting to get a little bit high, but he's stayed under that for the most part. If you want a really dry mixing type sounding room for surround sound only, sometimes you target between 200 and 300 milliseconds, but so it's a little bit higher than that, but it makes sense and he cares more about music listening. He did mention that his front wide speakers that he has in here, which are still Revel Gem 2 speakers, that he made sure that they were right at the plus minus 60 degree, and that required over on the left-hand side where it's a window, it's like they're actually too high. He's inverted that one too, but he's like, it had to be up and out of the way, so that's less than optimal placement. I'm like, I'm the huge front wide fan out of the two of us, and I'm like, I don't know if I would have done the front wides here. That seems very, very awkward in his setup to have these front wides.
The only thing I would do different in this room, honestly, compared to what I'm seeing in here, the only thing I would do different is I never would have upgraded it past the 7.1 or not even, maybe even 7.1. I would have fewer speakers. I might have a 5.2 I think he's got 5.4 configuration at most in this space.
And I might have done a pair of top middle speakers instead of the Voice of God. That's a change I might have made, but that's obviously not a gigantic change from what he's done in here. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, the Gem speakers his surround speakers are high. Aren't they high enough? No, I mean, it almost, top middles don't even really work in here because of how he's got his surround speakers going.
Could be.
I mean, everything's too close, honestly. There's just too many speakers in this space. And it probably sounds great, okay? Don't get me wrong. I just think you could go with far fewer speakers and it would sound equally great. I don't think it would really make that much of a difference. But when somebody's shoving, like, here, you want some more speakers? You say yes. You say yes.
Right.
That's what you
Especially
do.
when you have a Trinov.
Yeah. Steve has an OLED TV. It offers filmmaker mode, and he tends to default to using that whenever he watches a Blu-ray disc. But for streaming, he tends to switch to the cinema picture mode, and then for gaming, he uses the game optimizer mode. Sometimes he forgets to switch to picture mode, so he's concerned about which picture modes he should be using, and he'd like to know if there's a way to make his TV switch automatically depending on what he's watching. He didn't say which TV it is, did he?
He didn't say specifically. It's an OLED.
I
think it's an LG, given the names.
Yeah, one would think. What are the actual differences between these various picture modes, and is it best to switch between them for different sources the way he's doing? Generally speaking, I don't. I pick a mode, and that's the mode that okay. Your TV will switch between standard definition and high definition or HDR and that sort of stuff. So you may have to make different settings based on what it will automatically switch to.
Yeah, standard dynamic range and high dynamic range. But it'll still be like you've chosen a picture mode, and then it switches between the SDR and HDR versions of that picture mode.
And that's usually the way that I do it. But then gaming, of course, if you're looking for the high frame rate and the VRR and all that other stuff, a lot of times
lowest latency. That's the main thing. The lowest latency. Yeah.
You do have to maybe switch that automatically. I switch that manually if it doesn't do it automatically. And since I don't game,
there is the auto low latency mode trigger that comes out of an Xbox, but does not come out of a PlayStation. So that's a little bit problematic there. I think about it less in terms of matching a picture mode to a source device than I do matching a picture mode to the lighting scenario in my room. Because I do like to have, like in my living room setup, I like to have 2 picture modes that I have calibrated, because if I'm watching at night, where even if I've got my shades open, it is just dark in my room, I like to have a picture mode that honestly, the peak brightness is a little bit lower, and the gamma is going to be set to a higher numerical value, but a shallower gamma on the low end. I like to have that for the dark setting, and then during the noonday sun, when there's light coming into my living room, I like to have a mode where the peak brightness is higher and the gamma is a lower numerical value, but that lets me see the shadows more easily. So I like to have at least 2 different picture modes for the lighting scenario in my room, but not so much for the source devices. But that's because I never activate something like frame interpolation, the soap opera effect, the motion smoothing. I never activate that. But some people really, really do prefer to have that for their streaming services, say, or when they're watching sports specifically. They really like to have that frame interpolation turned on, and they would never want to have that when they're gaming because it increases lag, it increases latency. Sure. So what you're saying is not unreasonable either. When you're saying, hey, when I'm watching streaming services, I like to have a picture mode that applies some motion smoothing. To me, that just looks better when I'm streaming. When I'm watching movies, that's always going to be lights out at night, and I want to have the most accurate picture mode for that. And then for gaming, I just care about having the lowest latency, so I end up with 3 different picture modes that way. That's a totally reasonable thing to do. So that's really what it's about there. Because as far as the color temperature, that should be the same across all of them. It should be D65 white across all of them. You shouldn't have like your game mode is a lot bluer than your cinema mode, if we're going for accuracy in the picture. When it comes to the color points that you're using, like that should be the same. But yeah, if you have a day mode versus a night mode, if you have a specific game mode that just makes sure you don't have any motion smoothing turned on, but another one does. So if you're talking about defaults, there are changes in all of those things, right? The filmmaker mode has all of the motion smoothing turned off. It has pretty darn accurate grayscale and white balance and color and all of that, and that's going to be a great choice for your movies. I would personally still use that same filmmaker mode for my streaming content as well, unless I'm watching in the middle of the day. In the middle of the day, I might want it to be brighter than filmmaker mode. Filmmaker mode is pretty dim. So there I might choose a different mode, like an ISF day mode, which might be present, or a cinema mode if there's no ISF picture modes to choose from, and I'll just make that brighter overall. And then, the game picture mode, I'm just going to make sure everything is turned off so that I have the lowest latency that I have there. So I think what you're doing is quite reasonable. I can absolutely see myself in a scenario where it makes sense to do exactly what you're doing. Having it automatically change between your Blu-ray player and your streaming, the only way you could really do that is if those 2 things are on different inputs. Right? If you're not inputting everything to your AV receiver and then always using the same HDMI input on the TV, if you instead have different HDMI inputs on your TV for each of your source devices, then you could just have the default picture mode goes along with the input. And when you switch inputs, it's going to go to that default picture mode. That's about the only way you could do it semi-automatically.
There you go. Oh.
I'm hoping we can do a couple more somehow. I know we're getting late, but... I don't want to leave too many.
I don't know what happened here. What time is it? Oh, it's 5 minutes.
We're getting there.
Stefan, and plus a tie-in from Sasi. Last week, Stefan asked us about potentially putting all 3 of his front speakers behind an acoustically transparent projection screen, but we didn't know what sort of distances he's going to be using for everything. So when it came to the exact screen size and particular models of our on-wall RBH speakers, we said it would all depend on seating distance and resulting angles. So... His room is roughly 14.5 wide by 16.5 long. He's only going to have a single row of seats, and he's planning on the seats being 9 feet from the screen, eyes to screen. After a quick email with Rob, Stefan mentioned that when he goes out to a movie theater, he typically likes to sit about 4 rows back from rows from the back wall of the theater, but since he already had a prior setup with a 120-inch screen, he was thinking his new room should include a screen size upgrade up to 135 inches.
Ooh, from 9 feet away.
From 9 feet away? And you sit 4 rows off the back wall?
I know, yes. I was like, if you sit 4 rows from the front...
Hey, you're going to be taking Dramamine like Tic Tacs, my friend.
That's the thing, yeah.
God. He'll be using the Epson 5050 UV projector, and as long as they can handle the distance to his seats, he'll go with the RBH 55 IWR impression series on-wall speakers behind his screen. So what do we
9
think
feet. Yeah, they can handle that distance.
We have a better idea of the distance thing. I think that you have not thought this through.
Yeah, honestly, the answer is he already has the projector. Just project it onto the wall of this room, right? Obviously, we're not talking about picture quality here, but just project it onto the wall of this room and sit 9 feet away from that and get... you adjust the zoom of the projector in real time.
Hang some white sheets up. It doesn't have to be perfect.
It doesn't even have to be. It just on
live
the
with
wall.
it for a little while.
It doesn't have to be. Just throw the blue screen up on the wall. All we're caring about is the diagonal size right
You
here.
need to watch something that has some motion in it.
I suppose. Yeah, that's a
I
good
think
point.
that you would be much better off watching a movie that has some motion in it, or TV show or sporting event or something like that, with where the camera pans. And if you just keep a bucket next to you. Because you are not going to like it.
You might very well discover that from 9 feet away, 120 inches is too big.
It's too big, yes.
Because that's over a 50-degree field of view. 120-inch screen from 9 feet away is over a 50-degree field of view. And that's, for me, a little bit too big.
I think you should be looking. I mean, at this point, I hate to say it. I mean, you already got the projector, but boy, you could really go with one of those 83-inch OLEDs right now.
Or you go with a 98-inch LCD
TCL.
very easily. Yeah, quite easily. But I mean, when we're saying if 9 feet from eyes to screen, that's what you've set. It's like, 110 inches, 106 inches. That'd be quite comfortable to me.
Yeah.
120 is getting a little big. 135 to me is definitely too big. And I like to sit at a similar location. Like I like to be behind the halfway point of the theater, that's where I like to sit when I go to the movie theater. I'm behind the halfway mark, and it sounds like he is too. He's only 4 rows from the back wall, right? So
that's very much behind the halfway point. I mean, this is a world's smallest
very
theater.
convinced from 9 feet away, 135 would be way too big.
Entirely.
And I suspect 120 will seem a bit too big. So take the projector you already have, project it just onto the wall. We're not caring about image quality right now. We just want to get a sense of size. And you will be able to figure out that way, experimentally, what size screen you actually want when you're only going to be 9 feet away from it. That's
just
right.
put a tape measure. Yeah. And then you'll know. Like get it to keep shrinking it down until it gets to the size you're like, I'm not throwing up anymore.
That's right.
Here I am. Now put the tape measure up there, and that's what size you need. And then you're going to put your center channel behind the acoustically transparent screen you're going to buy, and then the 2 side speakers on either side.
Yes.
Because that's what's going to happen.
You were saying, I already had a 120-inch screen in my old setup. I can't go to one smaller. Yes, you can if you're sitting much closer. If you were sitting 15 feet away before, it's very different when you're only sitting 9 feet away.
So regarding those RBH Impression Series 55 IWR on-wall speakers, Sasi bought some for his parents' family room setup, along with 2 pairs of Sonos Max 8 in-ceiling speakers and his old pair of Rhythmic FV15 HP subs that he's no longer using, plus a Denon 38 X38H receiver, 3800H receiver with Dirac plus bass control upgrades to power it all. And they don't appreciate it, and they don't deserve you.
I think this is more for Sasi's edification than anyone else's. I really do.
He decided to measure the RBH on-wall speakers in the room before and after, and he was a little surprised and disappointed with the results, which led to more measurements and writing directly to Kenny and Shane at RBH. So to start with, measuring just the RBH speakers mounted to the wall of his parents' family room with no bass management or Dirac or any other processing applied. Yet he's got the following graph, which has a huge bump in the bass around...
Right around 200 hertz, honestly.
Low, like 150 to 200. Yeah, 175, I guess is where it looks like the thing is. The blue line is the center. It's the closest to being flat below 300 hertz. He figures that that's because the front, left, and right speakers are close to the corners of the room, so they're showing a bigger room gain boost in the 100 to 300 hertz region, but none of them look like they were extending below 80 hertz the way RBH claims on their spec sheet. And these measurements certainly didn't look anywhere near as flat as RBH's own measurements that they sent him prior to his purchase. So he took the speakers to a different room in his parents' house and measured again, and he's still got something very similar.
Yep, looks pretty darn similar, yeah.
The results were similar. If anything, the second room, the bass response was even less extended than this family room. Where's 80 hertz?
I mean, it's the 100 is sort of the thicker
big
line
end of
towards
that
the
big
bottom
gap.
there. So yeah, it's definitely rolling off before 100 hertz.
Yeah, the results were similar. Okay, wait. So we decided to take the speakers outside. You're making this all look crazy.
Totally normal. Yes.
Yeah, this is totally normal behavior for people, especially when you took it outside and it's snowing.
It was, yes.
So he decided to take the speakers outside and get some quasi-anechoic measurements. He put the speakers on the ground, firing straight up at the sky since they're always meant to be wall-mounted, and the mic was 1 meter above it, pointed straight down. He tried additional sweep measurements with the mic in a fixed position and on Matthew Poe's advice. He also tried a moving mic technique while playing full-band peak noise using peak RTA averages. So now he's got a different measurement.
And those look very, very similar. I mean, there are minor differences, but whether he used the moving mic technique or just a traditional sweep measurement, these are, of course, offset so that we can see them. That's very, very similar. So,
yeah. Very similar. No matter what, these RBH 55 IWR on-wall speakers do not seem to extend to minus 3 dB at 70 hertz like the spec sheet says, and they always seem to natively have humps and dips in the bass below 500 hertz.
Okay.
Now, all of that said, for a sealed, slim speaker, minus 3 dB at 110 hertz instead of 70 hertz seems expected and reasonable to him, and boundary interference is unavoidable with any all-wall speaker. So the only reason he was disappointed was because RBH had claimed a considerably different performance before he ordered. Why not change the spec sheet to better match real-world measurements? Like he says, the numbers aren't way out there or anything. And with Dirac plus bass control applied in his parents' family room, he got the following measurements afterwards when using 110 hertz crossover frequency for the pair of rhythmic subs, which is like super flat and with the bass boost.
Yeah, and that bass boost was intentional. That's the tilt that he wanted applied.
Yes, because his parents definitely want more bass in their room. They're not going to immediately after you leave turn off the subwoofers.
This is pretty nice overlapping linear response across the front
deserve you,
three speakers.
And you should come install this in my house.
That looks pretty good. It looks pretty nice.
I like it. He thinks RBH speakers sound really good in their mid-range and treble. They're just bass shy, and they need some EQ to help flatten out the boundary interference. So do we agree with him that RBH should update their spec sheets and just let people know that these on-wall speakers really need subwoofers and some decent processing? No, I mean, I don't know.
I mean, it would be nice if the specs lined up with real-world measurements. Yeah, I agree on that front. I mean, he definitely got these. I mean, he did more than anybody should really have done. Sure.
I mean, he seems crazy. I'll be honest with you. Seems like a crazy person.
Well, let's say thorough.
Yeah. The suck out at around 300 hertz is. I'm wondering what that is, to be honest with you.
I mean, that's got to be room response. Oh, you mean when you did the quasi-anechoic measurements? Yes. Yeah. It's closer to 500 there. That's going on there.
I can't really read this.
Yeah, that dip is about 500 hertz. So
that might be. What are these things? That might be no.
Well, he did say he had a wall about 20 feet away. That might be that.
It could be. Actually.
It could be the wall that's 20 feet away that's resulting in that.
You should have put it in the middle of the woods.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, you got to.
That's the only way you can do it.
60 feet away from every boundary.
Right.
But no, I mean, so I don't know. Maybe RBH was, doing a ground plane measurement with the speaker in a corner. That's how they got it down to 80 or 70 hertz. It's that type of thing that's going. No, I mean, I agree with you. Yeah, the specs should be as close to accurate as possible. He said Kenny and Shane are open to revisiting it and that. So it's not that RBH is trying to completely shirk this or anything like that. So but at the same time, they're trying to sell speakers, and they're like, oh, if it's only 110 hertz and no one's going to buy it, I don't know. There's a little bit of marketing going on there, I think, as well.
Yeah, because it really doesn't. There's no argument I can reasonably make that says that this is a minus 3 dB.
Yeah, it's not a 70 hertz extension, which, like you say,
it's definitely not.
When you have a speaker that's 3 inches deep and sealed, I'm not expecting 80 hertz.
I'm expecting 70 hertz performance for sure, but it's also just, at least from the perspective of me, because it's really kind of all about me. I freely recommend RBH all the time because they sound good and they're linear and they're designed to all kind of work with each other and they're honest. So yes, one of the tricks, and I've seen many speaker manufacturers do this, is when they do their measurements, they don't necessarily do them correctly, specifically so they can get they can make claims like what we're hearing here. So is that what RBH did? I don't know. Did you get like a weird set of speakers that aren't measuring properly? I don't know.
I don't think so.
I don't think so either. I'll be honest with you. The fact that both of them measure exactly the same.
But I also
disconcerting.
like the people who want to buy a set of slim on-wall speakers and not use them with a subwoofer. I don't know if there's anything that's going to convince them to do so. Like there's no scenario where I would buy any slim on-wall speakers and not expect them to use them with the subwoofer.
Yes.
Maybe if I didn't know very much and had very little experience, I wouldn't be thinking that I need to raise the crossover. That's a completely reasonable thing where it's like, yeah, if the specs were a little more accurate and it said, minus 3 dB at 110 hertz, then I'd be like, oh, I'm definitely going to have to raise the crossover from 80 hertz. So that would be nice. I think they should do that.
Yes. Or explain how they got this measurement.
Right. Yeah.
One of the things that they'll sometimes do is say, okay, we're going to put it like an in-room measurement. But they should say that this was measured in-room. But
Sure.
You're measuring in-room and getting something that's wildly different. But you don't know what they meant by in-room. It's like, oh, it's next to a fireplace and the mantle and this, and the TV is off the wall by a certain amount.
Or
blah,
maybe
blah, blah,
this
blah.
one was in a closet, because I don't know how else you get to 70 hertz with these speakers.
It does seem like they may be measured inside the box it came in. Stefan also mentioned wanting to use RBH on-wall subwoofers, and we said, particularly given the price, to consider getting a pair or even a quad SVS cylinder subs instead. Sasi agrees with us, but he wanted to mention that if Stefan is dead set on using on-wall subs, he might be wise to go the DIY route. Or, and hear me out, you can turn them upside down and hang them above put them above your furniture somehow, because apparently that's what Dr. Floyd Toole does. Which is awesome.
Revel Salon speakers, upside down.
Upside
totally
down.
Normal, totally normal installation.
Okay. I have been doing this a long time, and my wife is very tolerant of the stupid crap I do for audio. She's very tolerant of it. I mean, it's made us money over the years, and it's my passion and my hobby. And in a small part, my part of our livelihood here. But if I told her I was going to buy speakers, turn them upside down, and hang them from the ceiling like that, that is not. There's no world in which that happens. But God love him, he got somebody to agree to it. So Sasi thinks you should go the DIY route. There are slim SB acoustic subwoofer drivers that actually seem to be what almost all of the name brand on-wall subwoofers are using anyways. So with the name brand on-wall subs are just sealed enclosure designs, so there's really no reason you can just copy their dimensions and make your own DIY versions in this case. Are Tom and Rob on board in this instance? As somebody who measures once and cuts twice, I think that this is a terrible idea, because I would waste... It would cost me far less in both money and probably fingers to just buy them rather than trying to make them myself. But I am not handy, and I have said that many times before. I'm getting more handy, but I'm not. As you age and you get to be able to call yourself 50 plus, you have accidentally fixed a number of things in your life that you didn't realize you were ever going to have to know how to fix, and then you learn stuff incidentally, and now you're a little bit more knowledgeable than you were before. So when stuff like that happens, you start to realize, you know what, all this stuff isn't that hard. It just requires the right tools and a little bit of knowledge, and or maybe a lot of knowledge and a lot of tools. So you could theoretically do it. So I don't know. I don't know how handy Stefan is. So,
yeah.
I mean, you could also make the argument that he could just do an infinite baffle setup. And then he could be more, that we could have even more infinite Garys out there.
Without much
and
placement
won't that make the world a better place?
In the drivers.
Sasi is basically infinite Gary.
Yeah.
Like,
I think he's gone a step past that in the snow outdoor measurement. I don't know that Gary would even do that.
Maybe that's why it measured so poorly, because it was so cold. Have you ever thought about that? The sound waves couldn't travel through all that dense, cold
frigid
air.
At 500 hertz. It's really tough for me to get on board with this on-wall sub thing, because even in the 15 by 17 or 14.5 by 16.5 foot room, to get flat 20 hertz extension,
huge. Yeah,
these cabinets are 7 feet tall.
Yeah,
because the depth is so narrow.
Yeah.
It's 2 of these active drivers, and you kind of need 4 of them. So we're talking 8 of these drivers, and then you need to apply liberally EQ because you actually need to tamp down everything that's above 30 hertz to get the 20 hertz extension. Or you could just get a pair of cylinder subs. It's so much cheaper and easier and better in terms of performance that I'm like, just get the pair of cylinder subs, man.
I agree.
Yeah.
We'll do one more and we'll be done. Infinite
Good.
Gary plus Sasi again because he is everywhere.
He has been everywhere this week, yes.
So the AWOL and Hisense MX micro LED display announcements at CES seem to be a good signs that for the prices of consumer micro LEDs coming down finally. Mm-hmm. Do we think micro LEDs will fully replace? Please,
Gary loves the speculation questions.
please stop. Why must? Why? We don't know.
No, but this
That's
one is
the answer to all of the questions. Mm-hmm. Do we think that micro LEDs will fully replace OLED in the consumer display market at some point, maybe in 5 to 10 years? Yes. No. Maybe.
I realistically, honestly say no. Because it's not as though development on OLED is going to just stop now that micro LED is advancing. It's not as though prices on OLEDs are going to stop going down as well. So, I mean, there will always be a market for, LCDs are not going to go away just because micro LEDs come onto the scene at reasonably affordable prices. In 5 to 10 years, micro LEDs are still going to be more expensive than OLEDs, are going to be more expensive than LCDs. I think all of these are going to exist in the market going forward.
Yeah. Hopefully LEDs will die, but we'll see. And for some more speculation, because Tom loves it so much, Sasi heard Gary's previous question about whether we think Denon and Marantz will introduce any new receivers in 2025. He agrees that HDMI 2.2 models are probably unlikely this year, but what about potentially releasing one or more models with Dirac Art, or active room treatment? Mm-hmm. Well, Onkyo got you beat, buddy. Storm Audio actually had a limited exclusivity deal with as the first brand to offer Dirac Art, but that deal is now expired, and other brands are allowed to offer Dirac Art if they want to. Do we think Den and Marantz might do so this year? No. I'm going to say no.
I also think no, to be honest.
I'm going to say no.
It isn't completely out of the question, but they don't have as close a relationship with Dirac as Onkyo has forged. Onkyo made quite a big deal about the closeness of relationship that they've now forged with Dirac. Obviously,
are very special partners.
Yes. Obviously, Denon and Marantz are partners of Dirac. They're offering that as an optional upgrade to their receivers.
It seems like, to be honest with you.
A little bit.
Well, I think they're straddling that line because they have Odyssey still. As long as Odyssey is still in the books, I think that you're going to see a delayed uptake of Dirac features in Denon and Marantz.
And you do need to kind of specifically support art. It's not really the type of thing that they're going to be able to add to existing models just with a firmware update type of thing. I'd love to be proven wrong about that, but everything that I know about it seems to be required at a chip level, which is why it's only those newest 2-channel only Onkyo devices. There's no talk of adding art to the existing, RZ line of receivers at this point over in Onkyo land. So given that we're on it's like a 3-year product cycle to develop something, they maybe started looking at it last year. I don't think it's going to be this year. I don't think it's going to be next year. Maybe in 2027. That's my honest prediction on when we might start to see Dirac Art in a more mass market brand.
All right. Who do we have left?
We have on our list Bret and Mike and Sammy. Those are all on the list for First Up next week.
All right. Sounds good. We want to thank our listeners of the week. We want to thank Eli or Eliezer, who went to avrant.com, clicked on the Buy Us a Cup of Coffee link, and sent us a PayPal donation, as well as our 132 patrons over at patreon.com.
That is right, Eliezer. Thank you very much for that PayPal donation. And patreon.com/AVRant podcast is where you can go to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So a big thank you to our 132 patrons over there.
We want to thank James over at Linus Tech Tips for screwing Rob. And I'm sorry, sending Rob screwdrivers?
That was one of the presents, yes.
Oh, that's right. Okay. And Dan for also sending Rob some coasters. Thank you very much.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Dan.
And thank those of you who sent us notes of gratitude, including Sasi, Gurinder, Nathan, Stefan, Bret, Dazz, and Ilango. Thank you for thanking us.
Yeah, thank you, Sasi, Gurinder, Nathan, Stefan, Bret, Dazz, and Ilango for your notes of encouragement and gratitude, and they are very much appreciated. And a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
If you want to get your question answered on this podcast, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Andry.
And I'm Rob H. Now go out and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.